Sonny stared at the little girl, trying not to lose his composure. What is wrong with these people? He had 2 horns, a mouth full of sharp fangs, long claws, and 4 damned arms. And yet, the first thing that both Effie and Kai had reacted to was his height. Was he not allowed to be tall for once? Continuing to pretend to fight the monstrous child in earnest, he pointed to his chest instead of an answer. Effie, too, slowed down her relentless assault a bit, just enough to give him some breathing room without making her changed attitude obvious. A few moments later, when they were close to each other, she hissed quietly,
"Let me guess, you saw the message I left that said not to come to the Temple of Chalice, and naturally decided to do the exact opposite?"
Sonny spun, avoiding her fist, and raised 2 fingers. The girl frowned.
2? Is someone else with you? Cassia? Kai? Ah, it's Kai. So, both of you decided to ignore my warning.
She deflected his dagger to the side, grimaced when it slid over a barely healed laceration on her forearm, and then squeaked in her childish voice,
"Well, good. I might have been too full of myself thinking that I would be able to actually escape this damned place. So, I am really, really glad you came."
Sonny thrust his greatsword forward, narrowly missing the girl's head, and then let out a low growl. Effie gritted her teeth.
"But Sonny, we have 2 problems. One is that these lunatics will never let their disciples leave the sect alive. The second is that if one of us doesn't kill the other in this duel, my teachers are going to kill us both. So..."
She caught his sword with one hand, then brought her fist on its blade, shattering it and making Sonny stumble.
"So I hope that you have a plan. No, I know you do. Don't you?"
Despite how beaten and bruised the girl was, her soft voice sounded optimistic and cheerful. Knowing that Effie was confident in his ability to get them both out of this dire situation alive somehow, Sonny felt very validated. The problem was that he did not have a plan. In fact, he didn't have the slightest idea about how to survive this mess. Yet. So he simply shook his head, making Effie pale and grow silent. As they continued to fight, Sonny thought feverishly. He didn't see any chance of escaping the Temple of the Chalice without a bloody battle against the War Maidens, as well as any way for the 3 of them to come up on top in that battle. Effie was strong and fearsome, but she was not Solvain. She would not have been able to fight her way out of the sect as that fiend had. With Kai and Sonny added into the equation, however, things still didn't look too good. Out of the 3, Sonny was the powerhouse. Even though his physical might was lesser than that of the Huntress overall, he was a much, much deadlier creature. Added to that were his 3 shadows, 2 of which were ascended demons, while the 3rd was an awakened terror. Sonny alone was most likely enough to contain 2 out of 3 senior war maidens at least. Effie would have to handle the 3rd one, which would leave Kai alone against dozens of awakened warriors gathered in the hall. That wouldn't work. No matter how Sonny moved the elements of the theoretical battle, nothing gave them a good chance of escaping alive. However, there had to be a way. The War Maidens had been defeated in the future, after all, so they were not invincible. Thinking of the future, he hesitated for a moment, and then glanced at the massive stone chalice towering in the center of the hall, full of furious white flame. Unlike in the future, it was still whole and imposing, the complex enchantment that permeated the ancient stone holding the mass of divine fire contained inside. His face grew dim. "I don't like this idea. No, I don't like it at all." Indeed, he was not happy with the seed of a plan that suddenly appeared in his mind. not only because it would be extremely dangerous and hard to pull off, but also because going through with it had broader, far-reaching implications he didn't want to think about. But no matter how hard Sonny thought, he couldn't come up with anything else to do. If moving the elements did not work, the only way to achieve his goal was to change them. With a deep sigh, he concentrated for a few moments and then gestured to Effie to keep close. At the same time, several things happened. Outside of the circle of runes, the saint lowered the soul serpent and then outstretched one hand, which suddenly became shrouded in a swarm of white sparks. She took a small step to the side to shield Kai with her body. Both actions caused the war maidens surrounding them to grow tense, their hands gripping the hilts of their weapons. Within the circle, Sonny had become surrounded by countless onyx threads that ensnared his body. One of his 4 hands was enveloped by a swarm of scarlet sparks, one in a black fog, and the other 2 in a swirling mass of dancing sparks of white light. The 3 senior maidens overseeing the fight frowned when they saw the 4-armed demon undergo a strange transmutation. Although just a little, their stances shifted, revealing their readiness to intervene should a need arise. But they didn't move yet, reluctant to intrude upon the duel without an undeniable reason. A few seconds later, a kite shield forged out of dull steel appeared on the saint's arm, while the odachi she held silently slid into the shadows. Sonny was suddenly clad in an intricate onyx armor, holding a somber spear in one of his lower hands and an austere tachi in another. Finally, a black bow with a scarlet string and a strange arrow that seemed to be made out of a bolt of lightning appeared in his upper hands. Patient Avenger, Cruel Sight, Midnight Shard, Morgan's Warbow, Strike of Thunder, and Mantle of the Underworld augmented by Memory of Fire. He had summoned all these memories at the same time, knowing that he might not have a chance to do so later. And there was one last memory that he had called upon. As the light around him suddenly dimmed, the shape of a small black lantern started to manifest itself in the air. Spinning around before the senior war maidens reacted, Sonny knocked the Strike of Thunder on the string of his bow. Then, he poured a massive flood of essence into the bow and drew it, activating the Death Dealer enchantment. Unbending. Enchantment description. This adamantine bow demands a giant's might to be bent. Because of that, arrows shot from it travel as far as the eye can see and strike with terrible strength, piercing both armor and flesh. Death Dealer. Enchantment description. This bow is able to consume a large amount of essence to deliver an obliterating strike. And finally, Caged Lightning. Enchantment description. This arrow strikes as fast as a bolt of lightning and chains its devastating damage to several nearby creatures. Feeling his reserves of essence instantly diminish by a vast amount, Sonny gritted his teeth and released the string. At the last moment, all 3 of his shadows slid off his fingers and wrapped themselves around the Strike of Thunder. And so, this ascended arrow of the 2nd tier was sent flying from an ascended bow of the 4th tier. Its power augmented many-fold by the 3 shadows and the obliterating influence of the Death Dealer enchantment. A shot like that would probably be enough to kill a master. The arrow was too fast to be intercepted as well. However, Sonny had not aimed at any of the 3 senior war maidens. Instead, he aimed his arrow at the stone chalice. And not just anywhere on it at that. No, he sent the Strike of Thunder at the exact spot on the ancient stone surface where the weave of invisible runes was the most intense and elaborate. Sonny doubted that even this combination of powers and enchantments would be enough to deal real damage to the stone vessel. However, if he could destroy a small but important part of its enchantment, the divine flame contained within would do the rest. As the bolt of lightning streaked through the air toward the chalice, he grabbed the little girl and dashed behind one of the columns, then knelt and hugged her with all four arms, covering her little body with his. At the same time, the saint pushed Kai back and raised her shield, covering them both. Before anyone could react, the furious lightning struck the side of the giant stone chalice. And then, everything became white. The bolt of darkness-wreathed lightning shot between two of the senior war maidens and struck the side of the stone chalice. A flash of light drowned the hall for a split second, and almost instantly, 3 arcs of electricity tore through the air, traveling back to strike the sect leaders. Since there was no one else near them, the lightning did not chain further, spending all its might while coursing through the bodies of the ascended warriors. Sonny did not see any of that, however, because he was already dashing toward a wide stone pillar with Effie's scrawny figure held in his arms. Behind him, a single narrow crack appeared on the surface of the chalice, and through it, a furious white light suddenly shone. A moment later, countless fractures appeared on the ancient stone, and then everything became white. Ah! Sonny was on his knees behind the column, his back to the center of the hall, hugging Effie with all his 4 arms. His vision was gone, replaced by an endless field of flawless white, and so was his hearing. He felt the shockwave go through his body, and the pillar behind him shattered, turning into a rain of broken, melting stone. Then, a flash of agony pierced his soul. Everything was enveloped by terrifying, suffocating heat. He felt it wash over him like a wave, and prayed that they would survive its immolating embrace. He had a reason to believe that they would. In the future, there had been bones littering the floor of the hall, after all. That meant that when the real chalice exploded, not everyone around it had been turned to ash. Sonny also had the stalwart enchantment of the Mantle of the Underworld, providing him with high resistance to elemental attacks, as well as the Underworld Armament enchantment, channeling and enhancing the protective effect of the Memory of Fire through the onyx armor. That was not going to be enough to withstand Divine Flame itself, but could save him and Effie, whom he was shielding with his towering body, from the heat produced by the flame. A few moments later, the white field veiling his sight suddenly dimmed and gave way to beautiful darkness. The shadow lantern was devouring the light surrounding its master, uncaring for what had produced it. After a couple more seconds, Sonny was finally able to discern the shape of his surroundings. The sight of the great hall was all too familiar. The stone chalice lay in a molten pile on the stone floor, which was cracked and shattered. Most of the pillars supporting the roof had toppled, and so did a section of the roof itself, revealing a piece of the night sky with stars shining on its black canvas. The walls of the hall were fractured and had collapsed outward, just like they would be in the future. All over the devastated chamber, small pieces of divine flame burned. Some danced on shards of stone, slowly devouring it. Some on the charred corpses of those war maidens that had been killed in the blast. However, the flames did not seem to be spreading. Strangely, there were numerous runes shining on what remained of the hall's floor and ceiling, weakening them. Perhaps because of those runes, Many of the War Maidens survived.
Curse it.
The three ascended were all alive, although 2 of the 3 were severely wounded. Whether by the lightning of the strike of thunder, the explosion, or the divine flame, Sunny did not know. Some of their awakened disciples had survived as well, and were now slowly rising from the ground, shock and fury written on their pale faces. And Sunny was alive too, but not unscathed. His body was not damaged, but one of his shadows seemed to have been too slow to retreat from the chalice and had gotten itself burned a little by the divine flame. Since the 3 shadows were manifestations of his soul, it was burned as well. Gritting his teeth, Sunny endured the pain and rose to his feet. Soul damage. Well, what else was new? Just as he thought that, the shadows slid between the dancing flames and attached themselves to his feet, one cradling its damaged arm with 3 hands. Effie looked around with shock, sweat rolling down her little face.
What the hell happened? You... crazy.
She spoke, and instantly regretted it when a torrent of scorchingly hot air streamed into her mouth. Sunny evaluated the situation, then pushed the little girl away, gesturing at the far end of the hall. There, Kai was levitating above the floor, his hood torn and his wooden mask glowing angrily as if seconds from catching on fire. The young man was surrounded by a whirlwind of white sparks, no doubt summoning his armor and weapons. He was also surrounded by a dozen surviving war maidens. Effie's eyes widened, and she took a step in his direction, but then hesitated and looked at Sunny with concern.
What about the masters?
He glanced at the 3 ascended warriors, and then simply pointed a finger at himself. The little girl wanted to say something, her eyes full of worry and unease, but then nodded and dashed away, summoning her own memories. Left alone, Sunny dismissed Morgan's warbow, transferred the cruel sight to his upper hands, and slowly walked toward the fearsome battle masters. 3 shadows followed him, and wherever he passed, the light was destroyed and replaced by darkness. The 4-armed demon in onyx armor stopped a dozen or so meters away from the leaders of the Red Sect and tilted his head a little, staring at them with his black eyes. The white-haired descendant, the only one who remained unscathed after the explosion, looked at him with cold hatred, then smiled wildly and spat.
Foul shadow, you dare challenge the 3 of us alone?
The maiden with red hair gritted her teeth and moved her badly burned arm, raising the scarlet Odachi into a battle-ready position. The one with black hair leaned heavily on her spear, then whispered something, causing the runes on the weapon to ignite with an angry red glow. Sunny remained motionless for a second, then shook his head and grinned, revealing his sharp fangs. A moment later, 3 terrifying creatures burst from his shadows, fury burning in their eyes. One was a giant serpent with obsidian scales. One was a dreadful black steed with adamantine horns and fangs like those of a wolf. And the third one was a graceful knight in onyx armor, wielding a charred kite shield and a stone sword. Together, the 4 shadows lunged forward. An awakened had no business fighting 1 ascended, let alone 3. Each radiating an aura of an aberrant battlemaster. But then again, as far as Awakened went, Sonny himself was more than a little abnormal himself. He had already killed 2 masters before, Pierce, one of the wardens of the Night Temple, and the fearsome Red Priest, the slave overseer of the Colosseum. Both victories had been won by the skin of his teeth and cost him dearly. Sonny had even lost his head in one of those battles. The War Maidens seemed far more daunting than both of those men, and there were 3 of them. The previous clashes with the Ascended he had were nothing compared to the dire challenge of this one. However, during both of those fights, Sonny didn't have the opportunity to go full out. The first time, the Saint and Serpent had been preoccupied with the human echoes. The second time, he had been cut off from the spell, and thus from his arsenal of memories. But this time, nothing was preventing Sonny from unleashing the full and dreadful power of his divine aspect. It was time to show what he was truly capable of when nothing held him back. Fortunately, 2 of the War Maidens had already been injured by Sonny's treacherous attack, so although attacking the 3 of them alone seemed more than a little bit insane, there was a good chance that he could win this fight. As the 3 Ascended prepared to deflect the assault of shadows, the Saint lowered her shoulder, put it behind the patient Avenger, and aimed the charred kite shield at the enemies. Burning Heart, enchantment description. This shield can store a portion of fire damage it receives to augment another weapon of its wielder, or unleash a devastating shockwave. A deep, metallic groan resounded from within the shield, and then an invisible shockwave exploded outward from its dull steel surface. The patient Avenger had absorbed plenty of fire damage during the explosion of divine flames, and now all that furious force was released forward, shattering the chunks of stone that littered the cracked floor into dust, and sending the War Maidens flying back into different directions. Whatever chance of a coordinated defense they had before was now utterly gone. Without slowing down, Sonny and his shadows split. The Soul Serpent slithered between the dancing flames, lunging at the maiden that wielded a spear. Saint ran toward the maiden who wielded an Odachi, and finally, Sonny and Nightmare flew toward the maiden who was unarmed, but radiated the most pressure.
Come on!
Everything was going according to plan, but no plan ever survived a clash with reality. A moment later, something unexpected happened, putting a wrinkle into Sonny's stratagem. The woman with black hair twisted in the air and gracefully landed on her feet, plunging the tip of her glowing spear into the floor to stop herself from sliding back into the white wall of divine flame burning behind her. And then, there were suddenly 2 of her. 2 identical War Maidens jumped to their feet, each holding an identical glowing spear. None looked like an illusion, and both possessed real shadows. Both were made of flesh and bone, which meant that the threat she posed instantly doubled.
What kind of an insane aspect is that?
Sonny had never seen anything quite like it. He knew and heard of aspects of holographic doubles, but creating a duplicate of flesh and blood, was that even real? Or was this some insanely believable magic at play? Sonny bared his fangs, changing the plan on the fly. Nightmare pivoted and switched direction, aiming to join Soul Serpent and help it destroy the 2 spear-wielding Ascended. One of the shadows cast by Sonny swiftly slid forward, wrapping itself around the black steed. The other 2 rose and embraced Sonny himself, since he was now facing the most fearsome of the War Masters, alone. The Saint was going to have to deal with her opponent without any augmentations. He wasn't too worried, though. Out of the four of them, she was probably the most powerful. A moment later, the War Maidens and the Shadows clashed. To Sunny's left, Nightmare and the Soul Serpent attacked the two identical black-haired women. Now that the Shadow Steed was apart from Sunny and outside the area where the Shadow Lantern was devouring all light, the effect of the Dark Destroyer attribute was lessened, depriving him of its augmentation. However, the Dreadlord attribute was still working. No matter how confident and fearsome the War Maidens appeared, they had to be in the throes of fear and confusion deep down in their hearts. After all, their sacred chalice had just been unexpectedly destroyed, and scores of their sisters had been killed in the explosion. Added to Nightmare's Mantle of Fear ability, even powerful Ascended like them would not be able to resist the creeping terror. And the more terrified they were, the more powerful the Black Stallion would become. So, Sunny was not worried about the Serpent or the Nightmare either. To his right, the Saint clashed with the red-haired Ascended, their blades crossing with melodious ringing. The War Maiden pushed, causing the taciturn demon to stagger and make a quick step back. Considering how much the living statue weighed, this must have taken tremendous strength. So this one possessed some sort of a physical augmentation aspect. Her terrible burns seemed to be healing with incredible speed, too, which meant that the aspect gifted her with a miraculous regeneration rate as well. And lastly, there was a deep nick left on the blade of Saint Stone's sword. Either the enchantments of the Scarlet Odachi were especially powerful, or the woman possessed an ability capable of reinforcing her weapons, too. Still, Sunny was confident that his Silent Shadow would be able to win. The only member of their team he was somewhat worried about was himself. Raising the cruel sight above his left shoulder and lowering the Midnight Shard to his right thigh, Sunny lunged at the white-haired War Maiden, who was still calm, entirely unscathed, and unarmed.
Let's see what kind of a fiend you are, then.
Looking at the attacking demon with cold hatred, the woman simply outstretched her empty hands, and in the next moment, the stone shards and the dancing flames around them suddenly moved.
What the?
The shards of stone and the dancing flames moved, flying through the air toward the tall woman. Instead of crushing and burning her, however, they somehow assembled around her slender body, the pieces of stone levitating around it, to form a strange armor, the fire shrouding her hands like incandescent gloves. Sunny suddenly felt a deep, dangerous sense of unease.
How dare you, vile shadow?
The voice of the War Maiden thundered in the darkness that the Shadow Lantern had created, and then two furious white eyes ignited in its depths, piercing Sunny with a murderous gaze.
How dare you challenge war?
A split second later, the maiden disappeared from where she stood, the stone slab beneath her feet exploding into a rain of shards. Almost instantly, she was already upon him, a flame-wreathed palm shooting forward to pierce his chest.
Damnation! What is with women of war always going straight for my heart? This is already the third time this has happened.
Sunny awkwardly blocked the devastating blow and felt himself being thrown back by the terrifying force of the impact. Luckily, the mantle of the underworld had withstood the touch of the divine flames that shrouded his enemy's hands, if just barely. The enhanced enchantment of Memory of Fire still coursed through its polished onyx.
Ah!
Something wasn't right here. Even for a master, The speed and strength of this woman were way too terrifying. With 3 cores nearing full saturation and augmented with 2 shadows, he was supposed to be near the realm of the Ascended, at least, if not more or less on par with some of them. And yet, her might was far greater than his. That could have been explained by possessing an aspect that augmented one's physicality, but Sunny had just seen the white-haired war maiden seem to be some sort of an elemental sorceress.
I see how it is.
Crashing onto the floor in a roll, he instantly threw the cruel sight forward to prevent his enemy from chaining the next attack after the first, then slashed at her with the Midnight Shard. The blade of the austere Tachi scraped fruitlessly across the carapace of levitating stone shards surrounding the War Maiden's body. The effect of her aspect was broader than just elemental control. Not only was the fearsome leader of the Red Sect capable of manipulating the elements, but she also drew power from them. The stone probably enhanced her strength and endurance. The fire, her speed, attack power? Whatever it was, it seemed to allow the white-haired maiden to perceive her surroundings despite the veil of shadows his lantern was creating around them. With a ruthless scowl on her beautiful face, the War Maiden easily swatted both the cruel sight and the Midnight Shard to the sides. However, she failed to defend against the sharp blade of the ghostly stiletto that suddenly appeared in one of Sunny's hands and slid between the chunks of stone protecting her body. The Moonlight Shard bit into the maiden's body, failing to sink deep, but still drawing blood. Sunny grinned. There was a benefit to having 4 arms after all.
Not so high and mighty now, are you?
The maiden seemed more infuriated than hurt, though. The stone carapace swirled around her, sending the Moonlight Shard flying away from his hand, and then 2 incandescent fists descended upon him. A spark of flame traveled through the whirlwind of stone shards and licked her body, perfectly cauterizing the wound. The white-haired warrior and Sunny clashed, their speed and ferocity causing more destruction to befall the devastated hall of the temple. Since they were shrouded by a rolling cloud of darkness, no one would have been able to see what was happening under the veil of shadows, noticing only flashes of white radiance that tore through it from time to time. All they could perceive were the furious sounds of a frightening, inhuman battle. The War Maiden was faster and stronger than Sunny. Her aspect was fearsome, and her skill was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was different from how humans of the waking world fought, but in no way inferior. In fact, her murderous technique was utterly sublime in its deadly power, stark perfection, and lethal precision. She was also able to control the flow of essence through her body with such an intricate and ingenious measure of control that it made Sunny realize how crude and clumsy his own, which he had been proud of before, really was. His essence was running low, too, because of how much he had spent on delivering the obliterating shot from Morgan's warbow. However, he was not defenseless in that fight. While the War Maiden possessed a sublime technique, Sunny possessed a myriad of them. He was able to shift from one style to another effortlessly, dancing like a shapeless shadow, making it difficult to predict and prevent his next move. The cruel sight danced with him, swiftly changing its form from a somber spear to a mirror sword and jumping between his 4 hands. Sunny had dismissed the Midnight Shard, knowing that it would not be able to withstand the immolating heat of divine flames shrouding his enemy's arms. He relied on his versatility and deception to keep himself alive under the ferocious assault of the monstrous Ascended, and through all of it, he was observing how she moved, how her shadow moved, how they fought, how they reacted. Shadow Dance was slowly absorbing the War Maiden's sublime battle style. Thus, making her incredible technique more transparent and predictable. The process was helped by the fact that Sonny had recognized the same foundation in it that he had witnessed when Effie attacked him earlier. The two were a master and pupil, after all. For now, Sonny was locked into a desperate defense with no hope of launching an effective attack of his own. It seemed as though his death was only a matter of time. But Sonny was trying to find the right moment. But would he make it? Could he last in time for that moment to come? Sonny was battered and beaten. The onyx surface of the mantle of the underworld cracked and glowing orange in several places, as if on the verge of melting. His reserves of essence were almost empty, and his breathing was labored and arduous. One of his horns was broken, or rather, cut cleanly. The edges turned glossy and black by the indescribable heat of the War Maiden's fiery palm. But then, he suddenly saw it. An opportunity. There was probably not going to be another one of those in this dire fight. As the white-haired warrior raised her hand to deliver another terrible strike, he suddenly turned the blade of the cruel sight slightly so that it faced the enemy with the flat side. And then, Sonny activated the Light Eater enchantment of the somber spear, turning its blade into a source of bright, radiant sunlight. The War Maiden had used her aspect to adjust her eyes to the darkness, and for that reason, a sudden flash of daylight blinded her, while Sonny remained unaffected by it. He was relying on his shadow sense to move around anyway. His enemy was only blinded for a second, but in the battle at their level, 1 second might as well have been an eternity. Simply losing her sight would not have made the War Maiden defenseless, of course. A warrior like her would have been taught how to fight with her eyes closed. And indeed, she instantly shifted her body and moved her hands, preparing to deflect the most probable attacks. Unfortunately for her, Sonny had already gained enough insight into her style to know exactly what these movements would be, and so he knew how to slip through them. One of his hands suddenly shot forward, the clawed gauntlet shattering a piece of stone protecting the woman's neck. The other followed, passing through the momentary gap in the magical carapace and ripping her throat apart. A strange sound escaped from the War Maiden's lips. Her eyes widened, the white radiance burning in them, growing dimmer. It was a magnificently disturbing sight. The whirlwind of stone shards surrounding the maiden's powerful body rained to the ground.
Can't be. A shadow.
With that, the fearsome leader of the Red Sect fell to her knees, life draining through the terrible wound on her neck. Before the spell spoke, Sonny stood over her, letting his eyes take in the gruesome display of his victory. Then he leaned down and whispered,
"Find peace within me. This is the mercy of Shadow."
A rattling breath escaped the War Maiden's lungs. The spell whispered into his ear, "You have slain an ascended human, War Maiden Hildy. Your shadow grows stronger." He took a step back and grunted, pain and exhaustion permeating his battered body.
"Why don't I feel happy?"
Sonny did not mean to say those words aloud. With a frown, he pulled his gaze away from the corpse of the valiant maiden, briefly glanced at the emerald amulet grasped in one of his hands, and hid it back under the cracked breastplate of the mantle of the underworld. It was not every day that he achieved a victory in a battle against an ascended. He should have been celebrating. But really, Sonny was not too fond of killing humans. At least, those whom he did not hate. Feeling pain travel through his scorched body, and observing the sorry state of the mantle, he activated its living stone enchantment and saw the stone-like metal start to restore itself. He also sensed most of his remaining essence flow through the armor, disappearing as it empowered the process. With a sigh, Sonny leaned on the cruel sight and looked around warily. He was not in the best shape, and the battle was not over. It wasn't time to celebrate yet. To his right, the Saint was entangled with the red-haired Descended, their weapons weaving a fearsome pattern of destruction across the remains of the Great Hall. The patient Avenger was glowing with an angry orange radiance, and her stone sword was surrounded with flames. Augmented by the cold steel enchantment of the shield, it was somehow resisting the Scarlet Odachi. However, the blade of the sword was covered by numerous nicks and cracks, as if it was seconds away from falling apart. The body of the War Maiden, meanwhile, was washed in blood, but free of any wound, betraying the fact that she had been able to heal all the damage dealt to her by the Saint. To his left, Serpent and Nightmare were fighting the two identical Ascendeds. One, surprisingly, was already on the floor, the black steed stomping viciously on her chest with adamantine hooves. The sight of it was both disturbing and frightening, even though Sonny knew that the dreadful horse was on his side. The second maiden was entangled in a furious battle with the Soul Serpent, her enchanted spear flashing through the air and leaving deep gashes on the Stygian scales of the giant snake. Despite the serpent's advantage in size and might, the woman was too swift, cunning, and skilled to allow herself to be caught by its coils. What's worse, her weapons seemed to be able to follow the enemy into the shadows, striking at Serpent even when it dove into them to ensnare her. The black-haired warrior was truly terrifying. To be able to resist both an ascended demon and an awakened terror at the same time, even after being damaged by the strike of thunder and the explosion of the chalice, was something only the most fearsome masters of the waking world would have been able to do, if any. However, her luck had run out, because today she met Sonny. Stepping through the shadows, he appeared behind the maiden and struck her in the back, not at all concerned with how cowardly and dishonorable such an attack was. As far as Sonny was concerned, honor was for fools. While Sonny knew himself to behave like a fool on occasion, he was at least immune to this particular kind of foolishness. The blade of the cruel sight pierced the heart of the brave war maiden and flashed with white incandescence of divine flames for a split second, dealing devastating damage to everything it touched. The woman died instantly, without even realizing who had killed her. At the same time, her second copy finally succumbed to the Nightmare Stallion's hooves and stopped moving, her body a terrifying mess of torn flesh and broken bones. A moment later, it shimmered with a dark red glow and disappeared. The spell spoke.
You have slain an ascended human, War Maiden Gwenravier. Your shadow grows stronger.
One more left.
Regretting his decision to not let the serpent finish off the Ascended, thus replenishing his now empty reserves of essence, Sonny gritted his teeth and turned his head to glance at the Saint. However, at that moment, the voice of the spell suddenly resounded once again.
You have slain an ascended human, War Maiden Kara. Your shadow grows stronger.
What he saw was the War Maiden's decapitated body toppling to the floor, the taciturn knight standing above it with a shattered sword in her hand. The length of its stone blade, what remained of it at least, was painted crimson, heavy drops falling down from it. Saint remained motionless for a few moments, then glanced at her broken sword with regret. Her shoulders moved slightly, as if the shadow sighed. Dropping the shattered blade, she then bent down and nonchalantly picked up the scarlet Odichi that slipped from the Ascended's fingers. Finally, the taciturn demon brandished the Odichi and turned around to look in the direction of the entrance to the Great Hall.
What is she looking at?
Sunny frowned, then suddenly shivered.
Oh, right. Effie and Kai.
He spun, remembering that his friends were currently facing off against a dozen powerful awakened warriors. However, he didn't have to worry. The War Maidens, almost all of them, were already dead. Kai was just about to finish off the last one. The young man was clad in beautiful armor forged out of white steel and gold, wielding a swift saber. His battle skills seemed to have improved tremendously since their time on the Forgotten Shore. Those months in the army of the Ivory City must have taught him a lot. Effie was done with her share of enemies as well. The little girl was now wearing familiar bronze armor, the white chiton beneath it replaced by the red silken tunic of the War Maidens. The dusk shard was also there, on her hand. However, now, the heavy round shield was almost the size of her entire body. Just then, Kai dodged a strike of his opponent, hovered above the floor at an impossible angle, and delivered an unexpected thrust to the War Maiden's abdomen. A moment later, Effie slammed into her with the dusk shard. The female warrior fell to the ground, either dead or dying. Suddenly, the devastated hall of the Temple of the Chalice was enveloped in silence. The three of them, Sunny, Kai, and Effie, stared at each other with confused expressions on their faces. It was all over. Have they really won? Surrounded by devastation, Sunny, Kai, and Effie stared at each other with confused expressions on their faces. Their weapons were still raised, ready to strike at the enemies. But there were no enemies around. Just dead silence. Sunny tensely studied the devastated hall, then slowly pulled out the emerald amulet and looked at the little girl with a silent question written on his face.
Effie, tell me, is there, perhaps, a slumbering saint somewhere in the temple?
She frowned, then shook her head. Sunny was genuinely perplexed.
Maybe there is an indescribable horror that had been contained by the chalice and we have set it free? Or an ancient curse?
The little girl wiped the sweat off her bruised face, then spoke in her soft, childish voice.
Not that I know of. No. There are no horrors or curses.
Sunny blinked a couple of times.
So, what? We really won? Just like that?
Effie stared at him for a bit. Then her eyes widened in anger as she yelped in outrage.
What the hell do you mean just like that? We just wiped out 100 vicious, awakened battle zealots, and you yourself killed 3 ascended champions, not to mention destroying the chalice, which was supposed to be indestructible, by the way. Was that not hard enough for you, you crazy demon?
He tilted his head a little and thought about it.
Well, when you put it like that, I guess it was a bit hard.
The three of them, especially Sunny, had indeed achieved something remarkable just now, but it still felt weird. He didn't even lose a single limb, body part, or heart. Well, he did lose half a horn. That had to count for something, probably. Sunny scowled. That victory had not been easy. In fact, it had been the opposite of that. However, it had not been as costly as he would have expected it to be. 3 Ascended were no joke, let alone as fearsome as the War Maidens had been. Granted, they had faced him after being mangled by the strike of thunder, and the consequent explosion of the chalice, and he had only been able to damage the chalice, thus allowing the divine flame contained within to destroy it because of his insight into how true sorcery worked. So, in a sense, this victory was the result of those months Sonny had spent barely surviving in the Red Colosseum, as well as his trials and the countless nightmares that gifted him his third shadow, and more than a bit of luck. He sighed, then asked dubiously,
So, what? We can just go?
Effie looked around, her face lingering on the corpse of the white-haired maiden for a few seconds. Her face turned somber, and then she simply shrugged.
Unless you want to get roasted even more by the divine flames, I suggest we do.
Kai, who had been silent this whole time, looked around as well. His gaze, however, seemed to be aimed at something beyond the walls of the devastated hall. Then, he lowered his head, his eyes turning dark. The young man spoke in a low, hoarse voice.
Are there other children that were being trained in the sect? Do we need to take them with us?
Sonny froze, then scratched the back of his head in embarrassment.
I did not think about that. The War Maidens were known to take in orphan girls, right? Where are they?
He wasn't too happy about the prospect of taking care of a bunch of kids, especially since he had just slaughtered their previous caretakers. But the idea of leaving them here did not sit right with Sonny, whether or not they were just phantasms of the nightmare. Noctis would end up having to deal with settling the children in the sanctuary anyway. Effie's childish face slowly turned still, and she briefly glanced down in the direction where Kai had been looking a few moments ago. She turned away and said in a strangely even tone,
There were a few other girls with me before, indeed, but they didn't make it.
She dismissed the dusk shard, then bent down to pick up one of the swords laying on the stones.
The War Maidens were not bad people, at least not at the start of it all. But somewhere along the way, the sect changed. By the time the girl whose body I took over ended up with them, it was as though everyone here had gone insane.
She walked to the next corpse, stared at it with strange darkness in her eyes, and then picked up another weapon.
They were obsessed with the idea of creating a warrior capable of slaying someone called Solvain. So their training, what they called training anyway, had grown vicious, cruel, and inhumanly hard. Of all the girls subjected to it, only a handful survived in this batch. I was the only one.
Effie sighed, then stopped, staring once again at the body of the white-haired war maiden with a complicated expression.
Strange, isn't it? It was not like they hated us. On the contrary, they seemed to care about their wards a great deal. But that did not stop them from killing us.
She remained silent for a bit, and then added,
And despite the fact those girls were being tormented and killed, it didn't stop them from loving their killers. How strange.
The little girl was silent for a few moments, then suddenly smiled.
So, yeah, I would like to get out of this place very much. If there is nothing else, let's just go.
Sonny hesitated, then silently motioned to Kai to come closer to Effie. She was putting on a brave face, but he could sense that beneath it, the huntress was deeply disturbed by what had happened to her in this temple, and what they had done to the temple themselves. Then, he turned around and headed for what remained of the stone chalice. As he got closer, the heat of the divine flame grew almost unbearable. Sonny once again activated the enchantment of the memory of fire and the augmentation of the underworld armament, then moved carefully between the burning shards of stone. In the spot where the chalice had stood before, surrounded by a ring of flames, a simple knife made of a piece of ghostly glass lay, reflecting the furious white light of the fire. Because of the shape and position of the deep fractures that had spread through the cracked floor, it seemed as though the glass blade had been the epicenter of the terrible explosion. There was not a single blemish on its surface, though. Sunny lingered for a moment, then leaned forward and picked up the glass knife. It was light and cool to the touch, just how he remembered it. Just to make sure, Sunny glanced beneath the surface of the glass blade and froze for a moment, transfixed by the sight of a single string of fate encased within it, looping endlessly on itself. Even if he had not seen the knife in one of his nightmares, he would have instantly recognized it for what it was: the key to an immortal's death, the Ivory Lord's death. He had found it. Outside of the now empty Temple of the Chalice, the dawn was slowly painting the world in a beautiful shade of lilac. Sunny was sitting on the ground, staring at a scarlet Odachi and a spear with a blade etched with runes that lay on the ground in front of him. Kai had dismissed his armor and was standing nearby, his wooden mask charred and blackened by the heat of the divine flames. His gaze was distant. Effie was also close. She was standing in front of a pile of weapons, some of them whole, some broken and melted by the fire. Despite her exhaustion and injuries, the little girl, whose body was almost entirely covered by bruises and lacerations, was picking up one weapon after another and then thrusting them into the rocky ground with somber determination. The graveyard of swords surrounding the temple was slowly growing thanks to her efforts. Sunny observed Effie for a while, then sighed. He did not see a lot of sense in leaving so many enchanted weapons behind, even if most of them were only equivalent to awakened memories. However, he was also not going to stop the girl from performing the wasteful ritual, as long as it gave her some closure, or whatever it was she was seeking by performing the strange burial. It gave him food for thought, however. In the future, he knew there was no such graveyard around the ruined Temple of the Chalice, which meant that no one had done this last mercy for the war maiden slaughtered in the Great Hall. Was that the reason they had turned into vengeful wraiths, perhaps? Maybe. Or maybe the swords had just been stolen or destroyed at some point later in time. He had not seen the rest of the graveyard in the future as well, after all. So then, what exactly was the connection between the nightmares and the dream realm? Before, Sunny had been sure that nightmares were simply recreations of the past. Now, however, he was not so certain. After all, the Temple of the Chalice was destroyed in the same exact manner as it had been in the future, which meant that he had always been the one to destroy it? Could it be that the seed of nightmare was really a portal to the actual past? Sunny scowled, then shook his head. No, this didn't make any sense. If that were true, then too many things would have been changed in the waking world every time an awakened conquered their nightmare. The connection was too easy to spot. All he had to do was to go and carve his name into one of the menhirs of the sanctuary, then check if it had actually appeared outside the seed. People weren't fools. They would have known by now. Nightmares were almost certainly simply recreations of the past of the dream realm, and not the actual thing. However, the coincidence of how the Temple of the Chalice had ended up was too glaring to be natural. Logically, the appearance of Awakened from the waking world should have changed the course of events that happened in the past completely. And yet, it had not. At least, not yet. He could think of two explanations for that, one far less frightening than the other. The first explanation was that there was a simple case of his knowledge of the future informing his actions in the past. Sonny had thought of destroying the chalice because he had already seen it destroyed in the future, and so the cycle had been complete without any ominous reasons, just due to a logical connection. The second explanation was far more concerning, at least to Sonny. He knew more about fate than most people. He knew how hard it was to change it, let alone escape its stranglehold completely. So what? What if fate had a pull on all things, had influence over all of existence, and pushed everything everywhere in a certain direction, to a certain conclusion, no less? If so, the details of what happened could potentially change, but the end would inevitably and inescapably be the same. That was a thought that terrified Sonny beyond belief. He had proclaimed fate to be his sworn enemy after all, and now that enemy seemed more fearsome than ever. With a grim expression, he glanced at Effie one more time, then rose from the ground and walked over to the pile of weapons, picking one of them up and thrusting it into the ground. The girl was breathing heavily, her little body seemingly on the verge of collapse. Nevertheless, she glanced at Sonny with a stubborn expression.
What are you doing?
Sonny picked up another sword and shrugged. I'm helping. You must be hungry, are you not? The sooner we are done with this, the sooner you can eat. Everyone wins. No? Effie hesitated for a bit, then turned away and nodded slowly. Together, they continued to bury the swords of the maidens in the rocky soil, with Kai soon joining them. Before too long, the pile of weapons had disappeared, joining the countless swords surrounding the empty, silent temple. Sonny did not know if what they had done was going to change fate, even a little bit, but he hoped ardently that it would. The next morning, the inhabitants of the sanctuary saw a very peculiar thing. A man in a wooden mask, with skin that resembled tree bark, had effortlessly landed on the soft grass of the island, his tall figure covered by a fitting silk garment. A moment later, a towering four-armed demon climbed from beneath the island and joined him. However, that was not all. There was a scrawny girl of about 11 or 12 years of age sitting on the shoulders of the demon, holding his horns with her little hands and swinging her skinny legs wildly.
Giddy up! Faster!
Listening to Effie laugh, Sonny gritted his teeth, then said with irritation, Can you stop swinging your legs? I'm not a horse, damn it. The huntress did not listen, so he grabbed her legs with two of his four hands and held them in place, which was not easy to do, considering the little girl's monstrous strength.
Ouch! My bruises!
Effie made a pitiful face and whimpered,
Oh, no, please don't hurt me, Uncle Demon. I'll be good, I promise. I'll try to recover from the beatings faster. You don't need to get angry.
As the people stared at the girl's terribly bruised body with dark expressions, then looked at Sonny angrily, he hissed, She's not... You stop it right now, Effie. That's not funny. The little girl threw her head back and laughed again, then leaned down with a mischievous smile.
Yes, of course. Whatever you say, Uncle.
After that, she glanced at the tall menhirs of the sanctuary and lingered for a few moments, then whispered quietly into his ear
So, let me get this straight. Everyone in this nightmare was driven insane by the demon of desire, and to conquer it, we need to set her free? With the help of a mad transcendent sorcerer who wants to defy the gods, start a war against the other four chain lords, and kill them? And it was that guy, Noctis, who sent you to the Temple of the Chalice? He is the one we are here to see?
Sonny looked forward with a dark expression on his bestial face, and then growled. More or less. We have a thing or two to discuss with him. He paused for a moment before adding, murderous flames igniting in his eyes. Because I'm pretty sure that Noctis, that rotten bastard, has swindled me again. Sonny, Effie, and Kai entered the sanctuary, crossed the beautiful garden, and entered the sorcerer's residence through a familiar wooden door. Effie still sitting on Sonny's shoulders, with a curious expression on her childish face. The rooms within, however, had changed since the last time Sonny had seen them. The luxurious furniture was gone, as well as beautiful decorations covering the walls. Instead, all that met them was barren stone, with a few broken sailor dolls laying on it, their limbs disassembled and laid out around the bodies of the macabre pieces of art. The floor of the whole central chamber was covered by a circle made out of a myriad of runes, powerful currents of soul essence flowing through it and dissipating into the ancient stones. Noctis was sitting in the center of the circle, his eyes closed. Without the familiar carefree smile, his beautiful face seemed ominous and strangely terrifying. Hearing their footsteps, the sorcerer slowly exhaled. The crushing flood of essence slowly thinned, and then dissipated, retreating back into his body. He turned his head slightly and opened his eyes, which shone in the darkness for a moment, as though full of pale moonlight. Then, they slowly turned human again, and Noctis smiled, returning to his usual laid-back persona so suddenly that it seemed almost disturbing.
Ah, Sunless, my friend. You're back. Sit down, have a drink. Welcome.
He stood up and outstretched a hand as if trying to gesture at a set of comfortable seats. Then, a surprised expression appeared on the Transcendent's face, and he looked around the empty hall with a bit of confusion.
Oh, right. I've been remodeling.
Noctis sighed, then clapped his hands together.
Well, no matter. Dolls, bring my guests something to drink. They must be parched after their journey.
His voice echoed around the residence. However, nothing happened. He hesitated and then glanced at the broken mannequins laying on the floor and awkwardly shifted his feet.
Ah, how unfortunate.
The sorcerer shook his head, then shrugged and looked at the three of them with a smile.
Anyway, welcome.
He tilted his head and stared at Effie, then blinked a couple of times.
Ah, you have brought a child with you. How curious. It doesn't bite, does it?
Sonny frowned, but before he could speak, Effie blurted with feigned outrage.
I am not a child. I am 12. Almost.
Noctis stared at her with doubt.
It speaks? How bizarre.
Sonny slowly inhaled, then said evenly, "This child is called Effie. She is the friend I have told you about." The sorcerer's polite smile remained glued to his face. He stared at Effie some more, then furtively glanced at Kai.
So, one of your friends is a horribly burned vagrant you randomly stumbled upon in my sanctuary, and the other one is a small child.
Sonny nodded grimly. Noctis rubbed his chin and then cautiously said,
Sunless,
are you utterly sure that you did not just invent having friends? To make me value your own beautiful friendship more, perhaps? If so, let me assure you I value it a great deal already. There's no need for you to feel insecure just because you are not as beautiful, wealthy, wise, generous, and delightful to be around as me. Sonny gritted his teeth and then hissed furiously. I am sure that I didn't invent them. Are you sure that you really want to know the truth about me and my friends? Noctis raised his eyebrows with a sincere look on his face. Well, of course. Sonny stared at him for a few moments and then said, In that case, my friends and I are not actually a demon, a vagrant, and a small child. We are humans from a distant future whose souls were sent here by a nearly almighty entity known as the Nightmare Spell, created after the gods died and this whole world had been destroyed. Oh, and this place, it is not real. You aren't real either. All of it is just a complicated illusion created by the spell to test us 3. No, us 5, actually. That's the honest truth. The sorcerer looked at him with wide eyes. Then he sighed, shook his head, and uttered in a hurt tone, Sunless, there's no need to weave such silly lies to mock me. If you don't want to tell me, you don't have to. He pursed his lips and turned away. So childish. I take it all went well then. Since you are in the company of a new friend, you must have successfully infiltrated the Temple of the Chalice, found her, retrieved the glass knife, and fled before the War Maidens noticed? Sonny flinched, then cleared his throat and remained silent for a couple of seconds. Finally, he said in an even tone, well, actually, not exactly. We did retrieve Effie and the knife, but... Noctis looked at him with surprise. But what? Sonny coughed. We sort of destroyed the chalice and killed all the War Maidens. The sorcerer stared at him in shock. You did what? Kai sighed and then strained his vocal cords to speak. We were left with no other choice. The maidens were willing to give us a chance to earn the right to take the glass knife away, but they would have never let Effie go. That was a tenet of their sect, so the sect had to go instead. Noctis stared at them with wide eyes, his face turning deathly pale. He swayed a little, and then yelped. But what do you mean you killed all the maidens? How did you manage to kill them? What about their transcendent sect leader? Did you kill her too? The 3 of them looked at each other with confusion. Then Effie cautiously spoke up.
The venerable foremother, who was the last transcendent of the Red Sect, died like 200 years ago. There were no other transcendents among the maidens since.
The sorcerer blinked a couple of times. Wait, really? Huh. So, she just went and died. How pedestrian. Sonny stared at him aghast. Did that fool... Did he really forget that people had a habit of dying from time to time, unlike his own immortal self? How insane could this charlatan really be? But then he had to stop himself. No, that was not right. Noctis was no fool. He just enjoyed playing one. There was no chance that the immortal would not have known whether or not there were transcendents living in his territory, which could only mean one thing. Sonny took a step forward and growled. Do not insult us. You knew perfectly well that there were no transcendents in the Temple of the Chalice. And you also knew that you could have easily obliterated that whole place and taken the glass knife if you wanted to. We 3 are formidable as far as awakened go, but not nearly so formidable that we could do something that a Chain Lord would not have been able to. He glared at the immortal and said, the emerald amulet almost cracking in his fist, "So, Noctis, my friend, why don't you tell me the real reason for why you sent us there instead of going yourself? And be very careful what you say, because our beautiful friendship might depend on your answer." Noctis remained silent for a while, looking at him with an unreadable expression. Then, he sighed and waved a hand. All right. If you want to be boring, I'll tell you the truth. No need to get angry." He clapped his hands again, and the disassembled sailor dolls suddenly rose from the floor, their limbs flying up and connecting to the wooden torsos. Then, one of them disappeared for a moment and returned with a silver goblet full of fragrant wine, presenting it to the sorcerer with frightened reverence. The others backed away and froze, standing silently near the walls. Noctis took the goblet, took a sip, and looked away with a somber expression on his exquisite face. "Yes, it is true that I could have retrieved the knife, saved your friend, and destroyed the Temple of the Chalice myself. That would not have been too hard, with or without the Transcendent guarding it. However..." He stared west, his eyes turning dark. "If I made such a move myself, the other four would have learned of it. Then, they would have understood why I made it, and what I am going to do next as well. They will know my intentions eventually, of course, but now is not the time. Not yet. Revealing it all now would be troublesome." Sunny scowled, then briefly glanced at Kai. The archer was looking west too, his shoulders tense. The Ivory City lay to the west, the Red Colosseum too. He hesitated, and then said in a grim tone, "So, you can't act openly out of fear that the other Chain Lords will unite to attack you?" Noctis turned to him and smiled. "Fear? No, nothing that whimsical. It is simply a matter of convenience. You see, until..." Suddenly, the sorcerer grew silent. His face turned grave, and his eyes shined with a glint of distant moonlight. This time, it was not a performance. Sunny could feel that something had really gone wrong, because the whole room inexplicably changed, becoming much darker, colder, and full of dire tension. Noctis slowly turned his head and whispered, his voice stunned and solemn, Something changed? No, it can't be." He looked toward the doors and then added with a grim expression, "We have another guest, I think. A messenger from the north." The sorcerer seemed shaken. No, more than that. He seemed deeply troubled by something. Noctis stared at the door for a few moments, then frowned and said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "Let us go and see who is knocking on my door then." With that, he drained his goblet, threw it aside, and walked toward the exit. Sunny, Effie, and Kai glanced at each other, and then followed along. No matter who it was that had come to the sanctuary, they were currently enjoying the sorcerer's hospitality, so the identity of the new arrival concerned them too. Who could have affected Noctis that much? Or was the change he had spoken about the real reason for this strange behavior, while the appearance of a guest just happened to coincide with it? They were going to find out soon. Together, the four of them, 3 awakened and an immortal saint, crossed the garden of the sanctuary and walked between the ancient menhirs to the field of grass beyond. There, an elegant figure waited for them, dressed in an austere black garment. It was a young woman none of them recognized. The young woman was tall and slender, with pale skin and lustrous raven black hair that moved gently in the wind. Her face possessed an almost otherworldly beauty to it, its lines full of solemn grace and splendor. However, that lovely face was blemished by a stark flaw. Her eyes were covered by a simple strip of black cloth, the same color as the dress she wore. The contrast between the austere black dress and the flawless white skin, between the softness of her captivating face and the severity of the crude blindfold, created a tantalizing, ominous, and slightly disturbing sight. However, Sunny was not paying attention to the young woman's sublime beauty or to her dress. Instead, his eyes were glued to a single detail. There was a leather belt tied around the beautiful stranger's slender waist, and on it hung a black scabbard. He recognized the hilt of the blade encompassed within in an instant.
Quiet dancer? Cassia!
For a moment, Sunny was overwhelmed by a feeling of profound, boundless relief. She was alive. Cassia was alive. All of them were. And now, despite all the dire trials of this harrowing nightmare, the four of them were finally reunited. It was as though a terrible weight that had been crushing his heart all this time, without him knowing, was suddenly lifted. His cohort, his friends, were back together again. Sunny felt Effie's grip on his horns grow tighter and glanced at Kai to see that the young man's eyes were shining behind the wooden mask. The two of them had recognized Cassia too and were sharing in his glee. However, a moment later, Sunny's elation was gone. He remembered how and why they appeared in this field of grass to meet Cassia and looked at Noctis with concern. The sorcerer still had an ashen face, and unlike them, he did not have any warm feelings toward the blind girl. The situation was still strange and dangerous. As if sensing his gaze, Noctis frowned, then looked at the beautiful woman with a dark expression and asked coldly,
"An Eyeless of the Night Temple? Isn't it terribly far for a blind priestess like you to travel south all alone? Speak, girl. What do you want?"
Cassia lingered for a moment, then bowed slightly. When she spoke, her unfamiliar voice sounded deep and pleasant. She said,
"Greetings, Lord Noctis. I bring a message from my mistress, the one in the north."
The sorcerer grimaced.
"Oh, yeah? What does that dreadful woman want from me?"
The blind girl remained silent for a few moments, then lowered her head slightly.
"She doesn't want anything, Lord Noctis. My mistress, Lady of the North, Blessed of the Black Skies, is dead."
Noctis swayed slightly as if struck. He stared at Cassia with a pale face, then raised a trembling hand and silently grasped his neck. After a few moments, he spoke again.
"What are you talking about? What is the message she sent exactly?"
The blind girl was still looking down. Without raising her head, she answered evenly,
"Just these 3 words. I am dead."
The sorcerer scoffed.
"It takes weeks to get from the Night Temple to the sanctuary on foot, if one can even make it alive. Was she dead when she sent you, huh?"
Cassia silently shook her head.
"No, she was alive."
Noctis gritted his teeth in outrage.
"That woman, so insufferable. If she knew she was going to die, she could have said more than 3 words at least. After everything we shared. She just had to be frustrating to the very end."
Despite the sorcerer's lightly irritated tone, Sonny could tell that Noctis was actually deeply aggrieved by the stunning news Cassia had brought, which was a little odd, considering the Saint had currently been planning to kill the one in the north himself. The Immortals were very strange people indeed. But Sonny was stunned as well. One of the Chain Lords was already dead. Just like that? After 1,000 years of solemn duty, someone had managed to kill the Undying Transcendent without alerting the other four? Suddenly, a feeling of unease grasped his heart. If not one of the Chain Lords, then who could have killed the ruler of the Night Temple? Who else possessed one of the 7 knives? He knew of only one person. As if reading his thoughts, Noctis stared at Cassia and asked, his voice trembling with anger.
So, who was it? Who killed her? Solvayne? Or the Ivory Lord?
The blind girl slowly shook her head.
Neither. It was a creature. A creature that came from the fog.
The sorcerer chuckled.
I see. So the ivory knife fell into the hands of one of those? Huh. She could have saved herself if she had only wanted. But she grew indifferent to things like that a long time ago, didn't she? That was her madness.
Noctis remained silent for a while, and then suddenly spoke again, his eyes glinting with his own madness.
So then, the North is in disarray, the Night Temple is without a leader, and its army needs a new commander. Thousands of soldiers, hundreds of awakened warriors, all hoping to find someone to serve and protect their families, right?
Cassia lingered for a moment, seeming to be struggling to figure out how exactly to break this next bit of news. After a few long seconds, she shook her head again.
No.
Noctis raised an eyebrow.
What? Why not?
She straightened, then answered simply,
They are also dead.
The sorcerer blinked a couple of times.
Huh? Who is dead?
The young woman remained still as she spoke, her voice calm and even.
Everyone. The soldiers, the priestesses, the awakened, the families. Everyone is dead, and the northern reach stands empty. The creature took them all.
Everyone seemed stunned into a grave silence by these words. Even Noctis was shocked, and he was someone who must have heard and seen quite a lot during his long life. Frozen, Sonny stared at Cassia, his lightless pupils narrowing into 2 vertical slits. Everyone was dead? Everyone? Had Mordred slaughtered an entire region? Thousands of people? Possibly even tens of thousands? Mundane humans awakened, ascended, even the transcendent Lady of the North herself. Suddenly, a cold shiver ran down his spine. Sonny knew, of course, that the Prince of Nothing, the owner of the friendly voice he had first heard long ago, arising out of the darkness of a bottomless abyss, was formidable, and would have grown more formidable still after being sent into the body of a terror. He also knew that Mordred was not completely of sound mind, and that the influence of hope would have only exacerbated that subtle fissure. But a slaughter of such a scale, he had never, in his wildest dreams, even considered that Mordred was capable of committing something like that. And why? What goal was the banished prince pursuing? He was never cruel without a cold and calculated reason. Or at least, he had not been in the past. Every monstrous act that Mordred had perpetrated before was full of perverse but deliberate practicality. But this How could something like this ever be practical? Even forming a seventh core would not have demanded a brutal massacre of this magnitude. No. This had to be an action of pure malice and cruelty. A cruelty that Sonny found difficult to even process. But that wasn't the only thought that left him conflicted. Sonny really did not know how to feel. On one hand, the news of a Chain Lord's demise was beneficial for his plans. In that sense, the Prince of Nothing had already accomplished more to conquer the nightmare than the four of them combined. But on the other hand, Sonny just couldn't help but feel uneasy about it. And about Mordred. What was the Son of Valor planning? His thoughts were interrupted by Noctis, who let out a deep sigh.
Everyone is dead. I barely remember the last time something like that happened. But when I was young, at the dawn of the Age of Heroes, things like this were actually rather common. You wouldn't remember, I guess. That is what happens when human champions grow unfit for their duty.
He looked away with a dark expression, and then added in a grim tone,
And we, the champions of this kingdom, have been unfit for quite a while now. If the lords can even be called champions at this point, come to think of it, I'm genuinely surprised that something like this did not happen much sooner.
He sighed again, then shrugged and turned to Cassia, seemingly having no desire to elaborate on this strange statement.
Thank you for delivering this message, girl. If everyone in the north is dead, that makes you the last one, then.
The blind woman lingered for a moment, then nodded. Noctis pursed his lips.
Well, I am very sorry. For what it is worth, you are welcome to stay here in my sanctuary. There is a place for those who are lost, lonesome, and have nowhere else to go. Don't hesitate to ask if you need anything.
He turned away as if losing any interest in the conversation, but at that moment, Cassia suddenly spoke up.
Actually, there is something that I need.
The sorcerer stopped, then looked at her with a slight frown and asked with a bit of surprise.
Really? Oh, then tell me. I am sure I'll be able to help.
The beautiful young woman placed a hand on the hilt of her rapier and then said, her voice deep and pleasant,
I am looking for my friends. I wonder if you would be able to help me find them, Lord Noctis.
Noctis blinked a couple of times, then glanced at Sonny, Kai, and Effie with a strange expression on his face. Finally, he answered in a cautious tone.
Of course, gladly, but, do you perhaps not know how your friends look, where they are, and what they are called? If so, finding them will be difficult.
Cassia tilted her head, remained silent for a few moments, and then answered with a bit of confusion.
Why would I not know? I am looking for a four-armed demon, a burned man with a grating voice, and a little girl. Their names are Sunless, Nightingale, and Raised by Wolves. They should be here in your sanctuary, my lord, or at least visited it not too long ago.
Noctis smiled radiantly.
You would, wouldn't you? Not knowing something like that would be very strange. Gods! Finally someone normal. A four-armed demon, you say? A four-armed...
The sorcerer's voice trailed off, and then he slowly turned to Sonny, seemingly struggling to say anything else. Before he managed to speak again, however, there was a sound of little feet pattering on soft grass, and a small figure collided with the young woman, hugging her with inhuman strength.
Cassia, you are alive!
Despite the fact that the young blind woman could perceive several seconds into the future and had to have known that Effie was going to tackle her, a bewildered expression still appeared on her beautiful face. She remained frozen for a few seconds and then hesitantly lowered a hand to pat the little girl on the head.
Yes. Yes, I am. I am happy to see you too, Effie.
The little girl stared up at Cassia and then made a pouty face.
What the hell, Cassia? How is this fair? Sunny was short but became tall. Kai was pretty but became hideous. And let's not talk about that. But you were pretty before and became even prettier now. The injustice.
The young woman smiled gently and then tightly hugged the little girl.
What are you talking about? I think you became very pretty too.
Noctis stared at all this, then looked at Sunny with an inexplicable expression. The immortal sorcerer hesitated for a couple of seconds, and then cautiously asked,
Sunless, this beautiful priestess is one of your friends too?
Sunny glanced at him, and then raised the emerald amulet.
Yes, the last friend I wanted to find. Her name is Song of the Fallen.
Noctis remained silent for a while, then looked away and mumbled in a barely audible whisper.
By the moon? I guess I really need to improve my friend-making skills. Otherwise, I would not be able to call myself the friendliest man in all of the Kingdom of Hope anymore.
Hearing that, Sunny smiled. He had a reason to. Their small cohort was finally back together. This nightmare wasn't over, but a significant part of it was. Now, with his friends at his side, his impossible task was actually starting to seem possible again. Soon, the four of them were gathered in Sunny's room. There was plenty of food on the table and a kettle of fragrant tea. They had a peaceful meal, avoiding discussing anything important. But soon, it was time to have a serious discussion. None of the four seemed too excited about the idea, perhaps because doing so would mean revisiting their experiences in the nightmare and opening up wounds that had barely any time to heal. There were a lot of invisible scars each of them was hiding. None of the four had survived these 3 months unscathed. Effie looked at her empty plate for a few moments and then sighed.
Can't we just have a few days off before getting to work? The world won't collapse if we take a small vacation. I think.
Sunny glanced at his friends, the bruised girl, the man with a disfigured face, and a beautiful young woman whose empty eye sockets were covered by a black cloth, and slowly shook his head.
If we do, Noctis might grow impatient. I promised to give him an answer after I found my friends. He has already been gracious enough to abstain from killing me, putting my soul into a doll or a mop. So, we better not linger.
Cassia turned her head slightly and asked, her deep, pleasant voice still sounding strange and unfamiliar.
An answer? To what question?
Sunny grimaced, then looked away.
Right. All of you must have already understood what the conflict of this nightmare is. Hope, the demon of desire. Noctis is preparing to rebel against the will of the gods, kill the other immortals, and break her chains. And we have to either help him achieve his goal, or somehow prevent Hope from escaping. The former seems insane, but the latter seems impossible, considering that she is already able to influence the world from inside her prison.
He shivered, grew silent for a few moments, and then added,
Each of the immortals represents, or rather embodies, one of Hope's eternal shackles. They can only be destroyed by one of the sun god's knives. I am in possession of 2 of the remaining 4 knives. Noctis knows where the third is being kept, and the fourth one is in the hands of Solvayne, who will freely offer it to anyone who can grant her a worthy death. So, while his plan means going to war against 3 ancient saints, it isn't entirely crazy. Just mostly so.
Sonny sighed, poured himself some tea, and concluded,
So, we need to decide whether we want to help him in this craziness or not.
Cassia nodded, seemingly not surprised by what he'd told them.
Then first, we need to share everything we learned about the nightmare well apart. The more information we possess, the better informed our decision will be.
Sonny took a sip of his tea and shrugged. That was what he wanted to do as well. He studied the faces of his companions and then gripped the emerald amulet tighter.
In that case, I will begin, I guess.
Effie, Kai, and Cassia turned to him, trying not to show how curious they really were. And who could blame them? Out of the 4, Sonny's situation was indeed the most abnormal. He hesitated for a few moments, and then spoke.
As you might have noticed, the spell sent me into the body of a demon. A shadow demon, to be precise. I found myself far to the west in the territory of the followers of war. Even worse, just seconds after coming to my senses, I stumbled upon a beautiful woman wearing red. That woman was Solvayne, the transcendent priestess of War God. She easily overpowered me, but decided to keep me alive.
Effie's eyes glistened when he mentioned Solvayne. Kai, too, seemed to be shaken by that revelation. After all, he had been an officer of an army embroiled in a bloody war against Solvayne's cult. To soldiers of the Ivory City, her name must have been synonymous with power, death, and horror. To them, Solvayne was as much of a person as she was an ancient, terrifying myth. Sonny's face grew dark.
After that, I found myself in the Red Colosseum, an ancient theater built by hope, which the warmongers had turned into a perverse temple of slaughter. There were thousands of nightmare creatures locked in its dungeons, as well as a few unlucky humans. Every day, we were forced to kill each other. Those who survived received the dubious honor of fighting against the warmongers themselves, and if we somehow prevailed, well, then we got to live another day, just to repeat the whole process come dawn.
He remained silent for a while, and then added,
2 months. I spent 2 months in that purgatory. Of course, I would have succumbed to my wounds very fast if it hadn't been for my partner, a captive young man from the Ivory City, Elias. His healing aspect kept me alive, and I kept him alive in the arena. Together, we endured the slaughter, day after day, week after week. Still, our days were numbered. So I kept searching for a way to escape, and after 2 months, I finally found it.
Sonny touched the terrible scar on his neck and grinned.
Turns out, all I had to do was trick our ascended jailer into chopping my head off. Free of the collar, I killed him, and then got Elias to attach my head back.
Kai, who was in the middle of taking a sip of tea, spat it out.
What?
Effie only remained silent because she was in the process of choking on a pastry. Her eyes, however, were similarly wide. Even Cassia seemed stunned. Sonny chuckled.
You see, that transcendent priestess, Solvayne. Actually, I had already killed her once. She had been serving as the host body for a corrupted monster the Firekeepers and I had slain in the Dream Realm to capture the wreck of Noctis's flying ship. That was where I received an enchanted armor that allows its wearer to stay alive for as long as they have essence. I also had means of regaining essence, and so I was able to survive without a head long enough for Elias to heal me.
Effie finally managed to swallow her pastry and glanced at Kai with wild eyes.
Kai, tell me he's lying. Please.
The young man blinked a couple of times, then solemnly shook his head. The little girl swore, then mumbled in a small voice.
Crazy bastard. He's crazy.
Sonny shrugged nonchalantly.
What? That wasn't even the craziest part. Anyway, Elias and I almost managed to escape the Red Colosseum. But at the last moment, we were intercepted by Solvane, that cursed fiend.
The smile disappeared from his face, and his black eyes flashed with cold hatred for a moment.
She killed Elias, tore my heart out, and threw my body into the sky below. Luckily for me, this demon body has 2 hearts, which was why I didn't die immediately. Solvane either didn't know about that, or didn't care, thinking that the abyss would finish me off. But I survived, and found my way back to the Isles, thanks to my memories.
He sighed.
I survived, but I wasn't in the best shape, either physically or mentally. My one remaining heart was not enough to keep this body going, so I was effectively dying, albeit slowly. I made my way south, planning to eventually reach our rendezvous point in the east. However, before I could, I stumbled upon Noctis on the southern island.
Sonny smiled bitterly.
That mad bastard was very happy to see me. He thought that fate brought us together. And who knows, maybe it did. We made a deal, he and I. Noctis would replace my missing heart, and I would learn the location of the glass knife from a terror that resided in the nearby fortress. That terror, you see, had belonged to one of the Chain Lords before. He belonged to the Lord of Shadow. So, was there a better candidate to meet him than a shadow demon?
He didn't speak for a while, then let out a heavy sigh.
The problem was, the centuries of loneliness and being subjected to Hope's poison had driven the creature mad, so it attacked me. That terror had power over dreams and nightmares, and he subjected me to a few hundred of those. In each one, I was horribly tortured, experienced unimaginable sorrow, and was eventually killed. Luckily, I had forgotten most of those nightmares. Yeah, most of them.
Sonny took a sip of tea, then shook his head.
Anyway, eventually I escaped from the nightmares as well, by breaking all of them. And then, I killed the terror. Noctis replaced my heart, as he had promised, and brought me to the sanctuary. Here I met Kai, and we went to retrieve the glass knife, and Effie, from the Temple of the Chalice. And here we are.
He scratched the back of his head, and then added thoughtfully,
Overall, I guess it could have been worse.
Effie swore again, and then shoved another pastry into her mouth. She chewed furiously, and then hissed, sending crumbs flying across the table.
What the hell? It could have been worse than that.
Sonny stared at her for a moment and shrugged.
I don't know. I could have been sent into the body of a worm, or even worse, a child.
Sonny, enjoying his time in the spotlight, and the shock his story had clearly given his friends, continued to needle one of them.
Oh yeah, can you imagine if I'd ended up in the body of a child? Wouldn't that have been just terrible? What if there was something I wanted on a really high shelf? Or if there'd been no one around to read me a bedtime story?
Effie stared at him with no amusement whatsoever on the little girl's face she currently wore. Her rosy, childish cheeks only made her attempts to appear serious look more comical. Then she scowled and said evenly,
Wanna die?
Sonny shook his head with a grin, then went into more detail about the things he had learned, including various pieces of information he had gleaned in the nightmares, his experience with the warmongers, and his observations about Solvane and Noctis. When he was done, there was silence for a while. The others were digesting all the information he had shared with them, full of thought. Well, everyone except Effie. The somber silence was soon broken by the sound of loud chewing. The little girl swallowed a piece of meat pie, then blinked a couple of times, noticing that everyone was staring at her. Finally, she wiped the oil off her lips and said,
What? I am a growing child, you know. I need to eat well to grow big.
Then she wiped her oily fingers on the tablecloth and shrugged.
Well, anyway, I guess I'll go next.
The little girl glanced at Sonny, made a face, and turned away.
There's not much to tell anyway. My 3 months in the Temple of the Chalice were not at all as exciting as Sonny's wild misadventures. Although...
Her face suddenly grew dim and dark.
They weren't very pleasant either.
Effie sighed, lingered for a few moments, and spoke in a somber tone.
Basically, I was sent into the body of one of the Red Sect's younger disciples, an orphan girl who had been entrusted to the maidens for better or worse, but mostly worse. As I already said, their teachings had grown cruel and perverse over the centuries. Now that I know about how hope is manipulating everyone's desires, I finally understand why. That Solvane, she was raised in the Red Sect too, a long time ago. The difference is, she managed to escape, but we didn't.
The little girl trembled.
I ran away once, early on, and managed to make it to the Ironland Island, but I was caught, and the punishment was, well, at the time, they already knew that nothing they did to me would make me obedient, so they punished the others in my stead. After that, well, I didn't try to escape again. At least, while the other girls were still alive.
Effie grew silent for a bit, then shrugged.
So, it was pretty boring. Just endless training, battle training, essence training, body conditioning, and all that stuff. How to endure pain, how to endure fear, how to steel your will, how to be a perfect, merciless, lethal vessel of war. Of course, they were very inventive in their lessons. What better way to teach someone to endure pain than to torture them to the brink of death? Or over it, if the pupil is weak.
The little girl's face turned distant.
In the end, everyone turned out to be weak. Except for me.
She took a bite out of her piece of meat pie, chewed it slowly, and then said,
One time, they put me in a coffin and buried me alive for a few days to teach me how to conquer the fear of darkness. Those wretches. Who said that I was afraid of darkness to begin with? So stupid. But mostly, it was just combat training. They trained us ruthlessly. There's a lot you can achieve with a few awakened healers and no regard for whether your disciples survive or not. If we broke a bone, the healers would put it back together and order us to continue. If we bled too much, well, you get the idea.
Effie shook her head.
The thing was, though, that I was getting it even worse than the rest. The girl whose body I took had the misfortune of awakening at a very young age, you see. So the maidens saw her as their promised chosen one, a prodigious warrior, fated to slay Solvain and wash away the humiliation she had visited upon the sect, to avenge her sin and sacrilege. So they worked me harder than anyone else.
The little girl looked away, then sighed.
The weirdest part was that all the vile crap they did to us was done without any hint of hate, malevolence, or bad intentions. On the contrary, the older maidens treated us like their little sisters, when they were not torturing and killing us, of course. My teacher, Ildi, I think she thought of me as her own daughter. She cared. A lot of good it did in the end.
She hesitated for a moment, then grimaced.
Well, anyway, eventually I was the only one left. Unfortunately, well, I got it the worst. I think they still went harder on the other girls because of me. My presence reignited their fervor, I guess. After everyone else died and the maidens had nothing else to hold over my head, I started planning my escape. I had no idea if I would survive it, but luckily, before I had the chance to find out, Sunny and Kai came and obliterated the whole sect. Cheers. Thanks, by the way.
She nodded at them, and then stuffed her mouth with another piece of pie, clearly unwilling to say anything else. Everyone remained silent until Cassia leaned over and put her hand on the little girl's shoulder. She gripped it softly and said, "You did well, Effie. You did well to survive." Effie looked down, sighed, and then said darkly,
But this time, I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to save a few people too, but I failed. Who cares though? I am really way too old to be this sentimental, or maybe that hope already did a number on my brain. This is just a nightmare after all."
Hearing a little girl proclaiming that she was too old to feel grief would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. No one said anything until Kai leaned back and sighed. Then, his grating voice resounded in the stone room, sending shivers running down Sunny's spine.
Well, in that case, I guess it's my turn. My story is not that long, though. I didn't do much.
He glanced at his horribly burned hands, covered with skin so damaged that it looked as if it was replaced by polished tree bark. He remained silent for a bit, and then added,
I only fought a dragon. And lost.
Kai remained silent for a while, and then let out a heavy sigh. He looked away, picked up his charred wooden mask, and stared at it for a few moments. Then, finally spoke.
I was sent into the body of a centurion of the Sun Legion, the army of the Ivory City. The city. You must have seen it when we entered the nightmare, rising from the ashes as the time flowed in reverse. It is a wondrous place, beautiful, peaceful, and full of life, with people who are warm, kind, and care deeply for their neighbors. Dozens of flourishing islands all connected into a single whole by the aerial bridges and arcing aqueducts built of white stone.
The young man paused, grimaced, and took a sip of honey tea to soothe his aching vocal cords. Then he glanced at the mask again, lingered for a moment, and continued.
At least, that was what I thought at the start of it. Looking back, I was terribly naive. But it was so easy to be misled by how the Ivory City and its people appeared. Especially by the stark contrast between the splendor of that enchanting facade and the bare-faced vileness of those who wished to destroy it. The merciless mad killers. The warmongers.
Kai shook his head.
The people of the Ivory City are just like those we know in the waking world. They have the same values, the same ideals, the same regard for decency and human life. Now that I say it aloud, I realize they might be doing much better than us in that regard. My point is that they seemed nice. Their city was like a beautiful paradise, like a place that all human cities should strive to be. Was it so unexpected then, that in this nightmare, there was someone who wanted to destroy it?
His eyes grew dim. He hung his horribly scarred head low as he continued to speak.
The followers of the Cult of Glory, on the other hand, were exactly like what one would imagine the forces of evil to be. Merciless, cruel raiders that worshipped war, slaughter, and bloodshed. Killing simply for the sake of killing. Their perverse fate, their zealous belief that by destroying the lives of innocent people, they were delivering the gift of salvation to their victims. Murderers and madmen, each and every one of them. So you might understand why I was blinded to the truth. For a while.
The young man took another sip of tea, then put down the mask and looked at them with a dark expression.
In my naivete, I came to believe myself to be a hero of a grim fairy tale. A noble warrior, tasked with protecting a beautiful paradise from the tide of evil. I mistakenly considered the fate of the Ivory City to be the true conflict of the nightmare, and so convinced myself that protecting it was what we had been sent here to do. Unable to abandon my duty, and reluctant to become a deserter, I remained with the Sun Legion, thinking that sooner or later, you guys will join me.
Kai looked down and sighed heavily.
And so, very soon, I became known as a hero of the Legion.
His disfigured face contorted for a moment, but then the young man restrained his emotions and smiled bleakly.
I know that fact might sound surprising. Unlike the rest of you, I have never been a fearsome warrior. I have never been a dauntless leader of men as well. My only real act of bravery was facing the Spire messengers in the shadow of the Crimson Spire. And even then, I only survived because of Cassia. So, I was very surprised to find myself gaining fame and renown as a fearless battle commander.
Kai looked at them, lingered for a moment, and then said with uncertainty,
The war between the Ivory City and the Red Colosseum, you see, has been going on for centuries. Its bloody tides come and go, like those of the sea. Sometimes only small skirmishes and raids happen for decades, and sometimes there are terrible battles happening every day. Sometimes only mundane soldiers and awakened officers fight each other, and sometimes ascended champions appear to sow devastation on the battlefield. Sometimes even the transcendent lords descend.
He paused for a few moments, took a sip of tea, then continued in a neutral tone.
At the same time, I found myself in the center of a sudden shift from a prolonged period of relative calm to the start of a massive offensive by the warmongers. And very early on, I discovered an unexpected truth.
He glanced at them, thought for a second, as though carefully choosing his words, and said,
You see, I was always under the impression that warriors of this mythical era, when gods were still alive and magic permeated the world, were infinitely more knowledgeable, powerful, and proficient in battle than we, humans of the waking world, are. But as it turns out, that is not so. Maybe a long time ago, during what they call the Age of Heroes, they had been. But now, most of them are far less deadly than we have become. At least, those of us who had been forged and tempered by the Forgotten Shore.
Sunny raised an eyebrow, surprised by that statement. Noticing his expression, Kai tilted his head a little.
Nightmare creatures are nowhere near as numerous here as they are in the future. There is no spell, no nightmares, no trial of the dream realm, no gates. Unlike them, each of us has been forced into a life of bloodshed and conflict, thrown against unimaginable horrors with no chance to retreat or surrender. The spell might be a cruel teacher, but its vile lessons seem to be morbidly effective. Grow stronger, or die. There's no other way for us. So, most awakened from the real world have experienced more strife and battle encounters than an average awakened warrior of this time period.
The four of them all went quiet as they considered this observation. They had all been so changed by their experience with the spell. In some ways, it had been for the better. But were any advances in power and strategy worth the horrors they'd experienced? The risks they'd faced? The friends they'd lost? Kai sighed, and then added somberly,
That was why, even I, despite my humble aspect and lacking battle prowess, was able to stand out. I led my soldiers to victory, keeping them alive through the sudden attack by a large force of the warmongers. And then, I kept them alive through the rest of the campaign, wreaking havoc on the enemy anywhere my warriors and I appeared.
Kai grew quiet for a long time, and then added, his ugly voice suddenly sounding especially hoarse and grating,
And that was how I gained the attention of the Radiant Lord of my city, of Severax, the Ivory Dragon.
Kai poured more tea into his cup, then cradled it in his hands and looked away. He remained silent for a bit, then continued the ominous story.
After many weeks of battles and bloodshed, the warmongers were pushed back, and my squadron was recalled to the Ivory City to rest and recuperate from the hardships of war. We were met by a jubilant crowd that showered us with rose petals and sang our names. My name, too, louder than all the rest. What a beautiful sight it was. Victorious, we returned home, and everything was well. For a while, we enjoyed the beauty of the city and the warm company of our fellow citizens.
He took a sip, then shook his head slightly.
The more I explored the beautiful Ivory City, the more elated I was by its prosperity and its harmonious way of life. It seemed as though people there were all content and happy, treating others with sincere kindness, love, and respect. It was as though they didn't have a care in the world. And there was a reason for that. The people of the Ivory City could live this way and be this way because they were protected by the mighty dragon, Severax, a true descendant of Sun God, their lord and protector.
The young man shivered, then added in a hoarse voice,
The dragon protected them, provided for them, and guided them with his wisdom. It was because of him that the Ivory City was safe, sound, prosperous, and welcoming. Why its citizens were so kind and happy. This was a paradise of his creation.
Kai took a sip of tea and smiled sadly.
Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? But it was. I was just too slow to see it.
He remained silent for a bit, then let out a long sigh.
At first, I only felt it. A slight, vague wrongness. As if something was off with these kind, happy, beautiful people. As if there was something hidden behind their sincere smiles. I dismissed it, thinking that it was just my prejudice speaking. The mindset that I brought with me from the waking world. But the more time I spent with them, the more strange details I started to notice, and soon, a harrowing suspicion took hold of my heart.
Kai looked at them, his face growing dark.
A suspicion that there was madness hidden deep in their lustrous eyes. The same madness that the warmongers were infected with, albeit of a different shade. I had never felt as disturbed and afraid as I did when that first thought entered my mind. I was so afraid, in fact, that for a few days, I tried my best to ignore it, close my eyes and pretend nothing was wrong. But the suspicion kept gnawing on my heart, so I decided to investigate. It wasn't hard to confirm it.
A bitter grimace contorted his hideous face.
You see, as it turned out, the Ivory City was indeed prosperous, safe, and beautiful because of the dragon. Its people were indeed protected and provided for by the dragon. In return, the dragon only asked for one thing.
The young man clenched the teacup, almost causing it to crack.
It needed to feed.
He gritted his teeth for a moment, then said quietly,
The creature was fed with human flesh. 7 sacrifices had to be made to him every month, all from the townspeople and the kind, warm people of the Ivory City. They were more than happy to provide, ecstatic even. Being devoured by the dragon was considered to be a sacred honor, and having a loved one chosen as a sacrifice was a cause for celebration.
The young man grew silent, then said hoarsely,
The dragon never dictated who would be selected for sacrifice, but the people of the Ivory City wanted above all else to please the beast, so they always chose the best and brightest, the most beautiful, the most talented, most innocent, the most desirable. And there we were, young heroes who had just returned from a triumphant war. The month was up, and they chose 6 of my most brave and loyal soldiers, as well as myself.
Kai smiled bitterly.
What a reward. The sight of their happy faces was the most disgusting thing I have ever seen. Parents surrendering their children to death with zealous smiles. Husbands sending their wives into the dragon's maw with wild joy. Friends and neighbors singing and laughing as they led their fellow humans to be eaten by a hungry beast. Only little children did not share their glee. They cried when their mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters were torn away from them. Not understanding what was happening, but the crying children were punished and taught a harsh lesson about how repugnant their behavior was.
He grimaced, then put his cup down and looked away.
The whole city was insane. Perhaps one could argue that a few dozen souls a year was a small price to pay for a paradise. But what is the worth of a paradise built on blood? Nothing. It's worthless. And even if it's not, at least the wretches could have made the sacrifice without the ghoulish joy. Without the songs and the zeal and the kind, warm, sincere smiles on their beautiful faces.
Kai took a deep breath, remained silent for a while, and then shrugged dismissively.
Anyway, we were brought to an island that bordered the ivory tower itself and chained to a white cliff. The jubilant crowd disappeared, and soon after that, we heard the rustle of mighty wings. The dragon landed in front of the cliff, as majestic and fearsome as he was in the legends. A great beast with beautiful ivory scales and radiant golden eyes that were full of wisdom, nobility, and inhuman intelligence.
Effie was listening with wide eyes, biting her fingers. Finally, she couldn't bear it anymore, and asked in her soft, childish voice,
How the hell did you survive? Why didn't the dragon's flames kill you?
A sad smile appeared on Kai's disfigured face.
How did I survive? Oh, that was simple, really. When Severax appeared, I broke my chains and shielded my comrades, ready to defend them until my last breath. Seeing this, the dragon, he spoke to me.
His smile slowly disappeared, replaced by an expression of anger, shame, and regret.
You must have already guessed that Ivory Dragon Severax is also Sevras, the Ivory Lord, one of Hope's eternal shackles, a transcendent whose transformation ability allows him to turn into a dragon. He is a human, or at least was a human once, a long time ago. And so, he spoke to me.
The young man sighed.
He was amused by my reaction. We spoke, and what he told me, it broke me a little, I think. You see, I had it all wrong. The dragon had never once asked the people of the Ivory City to sacrifice anyone or anything to him. They had invented the story themselves. They made up the number of victims, and they started bringing the sacrifices all of their own free will, because doing so made them feel as though they were binding themselves to the dragon, that they were becoming a part of the dragon.
Kai shook his head.
Severax, Severus. He had lost a part of himself a long time ago, I think. He told me that, in the beginning, he wanted to be a good lord for the people, someone whom they could see and whom they could strive to become. and so he rarely appeared in his transcendent form before them. But as the centuries passed, he noticed that people were disturbed by his human face, and were only at peace when he came as a dragon, as if they needed him to be something else, something greater than them. And so, after a while, he abandoned his human form completely, and not long after that, the sacrifices began.
The young man lingered for a few moments, and then continued.
I asked him to spare our lives, but he refused. He told me that he had never accepted an unwilling sacrifice, and I was free. But the other 6, it was as though they were in a trance or had gone mad. They didn't even try to save themselves, no matter how I begged him to spare them. He refused. This was what his people desired, what they needed. They might have not been bound to him, but he was bound to them, burdened by them. And so when nothing else worked, I foolishly tried to stop him.
He smiled bitterly.
But how could I defeat a dragon? I am not a dragon myself, after all. He swatted me to the ground with one swipe of his tail, breaking my ribs and almost killing me. But I did not die. Instead, paralyzed, I watched as he turned his head, opened his maw, and turned my soldiers into ash with one immolating breath.
Kai grew silent, his face unmoving. After a while, he spoke again.
Overwhelmed with anger, grief, and despair, I screamed at him, cursing him, swearing that I will tell everyone the truth, that I will make them realize, that I will make them change. But he just looked at me tiredly and said that I will see. And then the ivory dragon was gone, leaving me alone on the empty island.
He looked down.
I was too injured to move and spent the rest of the night in the throes of pain. In the morning, the citizens of the Ivory City came. When they saw that I was alive,
a pale smile appeared on his hideous face.
They were stunned, scared, and angry, and so they built a pyre, tied me to a stake, and burned me. No matter what I tried to say, no matter how I tried to make them understand, they wouldn't listen. They only grew more scared and hateful. The dragon, he had been right. He had told me the truth. I saw.
Kai picked up his tea, took a sip, and looked away.
My bindings broke before I died, and so horribly burned, I shot into the sky like a spark. I flew away from the city, and somehow survived. Crippled and heartbroken, I slowly made my way east, finally reaching the Iron Hand Island, and then the sanctuary, where Sunny eventually found me. Lord Noctis had replaced my burned skin and damaged muscles with enchanted wood and tree bark. And here I am, as good as new.
He sighed, looked at them, and smiled.
Luckily, I had friends that helped me pick myself up. You guys, I'll do whatever it is you decide to do. But if there is one thing I want to say, it is this. If Noctis wants to kill Lord Syphorax and end the dragon's reign, I would be happy to lend a hand.
When Kai finished with his story, everyone remained silent for a while. Eventually, the young man sighed and stretched out his hands, which were covered in polished bark and looked more like those of one of the sailor dolls than those of a human. He moved his fingers and then smiled lightly.
Noctis did a wonderful job of healing my wounds, just as he had said. Some of the pain remains, but I am as strong and capable as I had been before. No, even more so. These enchanted limbs he gave me are much more sensitive to soul essence, and so they are more durable and powerful than my own flesh had been. I also collected a few memories during my time in the Sun region. Overall, my battle prowess has increased a lot since we entered the nightmare, not to mention the experience I earned and the lessons I was taught. Whatever comes, I am ready.
Sunny lingered for a few moments, then let out a low growl.
What about the other transcendent of the Ivory City? The Sun Prince. Have you met him?
Kai frowned and made a vague gesture with his hand.
Yes, I think. The Sun Prince is supposed to be a brother of Severax. Among the people, it is believed that his soul resides inside the metal colossus that guards the Ivory City and sometimes leads the Sun Legion into battle. I've seen him once, from afar, and, to be honest, I am not quite sure if that thing is sentient or not.
He hesitated for a bit, and then added,
You've seen him too. I think that it is his corpse that swings beneath the shipwreck island, tangled in the chain. Although, I can't quite imagine what kind of force could have destroyed that monstrous giant. He is at least 90 meters tall, with a body cast out of solid steel, and nearly invincible. He is also not a living creature, really, and so can't be killed by wounding or damaging his body.
Sunny remained silent for a bit, and then said,
There is nothing that can't be killed or destroyed, not even the gods. So then, 3 of the Chain Lords are accounted for in the future. We've seen the bones of the dragon, Severax, on the Ivory Island, and both his brother and Solvane found their doom near the wreck of Noctis's ship. But what exactly happened? How did they fall? And how did Hope escape? What happened to Noctis himself, as well as the one in the north? How was the Ivory City destroyed? How did the tower break free of its chains?
No one answered. They were all just as perplexed as he was. After some time, Cassia finally spoke. I am not sure what happened, but I know one thing. Because of our arrival, it's all happening faster. They turned to her, and after a moment of silence, Sunny asked,
Yours is the last story left, and to be honest, is the story I am interested in hearing the most, because it concerns the 5th Awakened sent here by the spell, Mordred. He found a way to enter the Seed with us, didn't he?
Cassia sighed heavily and turned her head away. After a while, she said, Yes, he did. The blind young woman remained silent for a few moments, gathering her thoughts, and then faced them again. Unlike what happened to the 3 of you, my arrival into the nightmare wasn't really that harrowing. At least, not at the start. I was sent into the body of a young priestess whose duty was to tend to the high priestess of the Night Temple, the one in the north. In this era, the Night Temple still belongs to the cult of the goddess of the black skies, of Storm God, the deity of darkness, stars, and guidance, and so no light is allowed on the temple's premises. She touched her blindfold briefly, then slowly lowered her hand. The acolytes spend long years living in the darkness and blind themselves before becoming priestesses. For that reason, they are known as the Eyeless. Many of the Eyeless are seers and possessed powers of prophecy and divination. For most, becoming a blind priestess inside a lightless temple would have been a terrible trial. But for me, it was strangely soothing to find myself among those similar to me, in a place where my blindness wasn't something to be pitied, but instead a choice, a sign of devotion. It's weird to say, but that was a period I genuinely enjoyed. I feel terrible saying that after hearing all your stories. Sonny arched an eyebrow. You mean you weren't tortured, burned to a crisp, or forced to fight to the death over and over again for months? Mind if we go back and trade? Effie elbowed him sharply.
You did hear the part about ladies ripping out their own eyeballs, right?
Kai silenced them both.
Don't worry. I feel like our friend's story might be taking a turn soon.
A pale smile appeared on Cassia's lips.
You might be right. Still, this first period was comparatively relaxing. The feeling of being normal was something I cherished. However, it was my lady that I found the most comfort in. The one in the north, the Oracle of the Night. She was not unkind. She treated me well enough, and I have learned a lot from her knowledge and wisdom. However, just like the rest of the Chain Lords, she was being consumed by an insidious madness. Hers was the madness of apathy. Over the centuries, my lady grew indifferent to most things happening in the world, or even to herself. That was why she needed attendants, and I was one of them.
The smile slowly disappeared from Cassia's face.
That didn't mean that she was powerless or without responsibility, though. All of the northern reaches of the Kingdom of Hope were under her authority and protection. There were many villages and several towns full of mundane humans who relied on the Night Temple for safety and guidance. For that reason, the one in the north ruled not only over the blind priestesses, but also over a small but fearsome army comprised of both mundane warriors and awakened.
She sighed slightly.
Their numbers might not have been as large as those of the armies of the Ivory City and the Red Colosseum, but due to their powers and my lady's prophetic gift, the North was never attacked by either. The people rarely suffered from the nightmare creatures as well.
Cassia grew silent, and a scowl slowly appeared on her beautiful face.
But as the one in the north grew more and more indifferent, that slowly started to change. Still, when I found myself in the Night Temple, things were still more or less fine.
Her scowl deepened, and her face grew dark and despondent. The blind young woman lingered, and then said in a grim voice,
"Until they weren't."
It was getting late, and darkness crawled into the stone room, drowning its corners in shadows. Cassia sat motionlessly, the graceful lines of her beautiful face contorted by a deep scowl. Then, A heavy sigh escaped from her lips. Finally, she continued her story.
It started soon after I entered the nightmare, but no one paid much attention at first. There were just strange rumors that reached the temple, resembling scary stories that people like to tell each other when the sun is gone and darkness envelops the world. Rumors of a pleasant voice that came from the fog.
She gritted her teeth for a moment.
Perhaps if my lady's affliction was not as severe, we could have done something then. After all, in this world, scary stories often come true. And this one was more ominous than the rest because it had to do with the fog. The Night Temple stands at the boundary of the Hollow Mountains, after all, and of the mist that shrouds them. But she was distant and uncaring, and so we have grown aloof too.
Cassia somberly shook her head, then continued, her low, deep voice enveloping the room and her three listeners.
As time went by, the rumors started to change. They grew more menacing and dire, telling tales of people who listened to the fog and disappeared without a trace. At that point, the eyeless grew concerned, suspecting that a corrupted creature had found its way into their land. Many of them possessed a high affinity to revelation, after all, and they could feel it. Unease, threat, danger. So, a priestess was sent to investigate, escorted by a squad of experienced awakened soldiers. And, at the time, it was decided that a divination would be performed.
She lingered for a moment, the story seeming to physically hurt her in its retelling. Her sightless eyes, so frequently able to glimpse the future, now seemed to be viewing these terrible memories anew, as if they were happening right in front of her, all over again.
The divination showed no result, and the priestess, she failed to return with useful clues. In fact, she did not return at all. She and her escort disappeared without a trace, as though they had never existed. Just like the people from the rumors, only by then, no one thought of them as mere rumors anymore.
The blind young woman shivered, then spoke in an even voice.
Finally, we became alarmed. The army was summoned, and many hunting parties were sent out to find the creature. Mundane soldiers, awakened warriors, ascended champions, the eyeless. Everyone was determined to catch the abomination. But despite all our efforts, we failed. How could we catch the fog?
Cassia's face darkened. Despite how much the story was bothering her, she pushed herself to continue speaking, to continue reliving the bloodshed.
And all the while, people continued to disappear. First 1 or 2 at a time, then scores of them. And then, one day, we found a whole village that stood empty. Not a sign of its inhabitants in sight. Everyone there, every man, woman, and child, was taken by the fog.
She grew silent for a few moments, then added grimly,
And then, hunting parties started to disappear too. Powerful, experienced soldiers. We even lost and ascended. The worst part, however, was that there was no pattern to the creature's movements. At least, none that we could recognize. It could attack a settlement far to the west one day, and then suddenly take someone far to the east the next. It was almost as if it could be in several places at the same time. Because of that, we couldn't throw all our forces into one location and corner it on a single island, and so we constructed a trap for it. All we needed was a lure,
and I volunteered to become one. The blind young woman shook her head. Of course, back then, I didn't know that the Fiend of the Fog was far more cunning and devious than any nightmare creature I have ever faced. But I found out. I found out that very, very soon, because that was when I met him myself. And as soon as I did, I realized what we thought of as a trap for the Fiend was instead a trap that the Prince of War lured us in instead. Cassia gritted her teeth. Because, while our forces were concentrated to form the encirclement, most of the northern reach remained unprotected, and so, left without defenders, one of the towns was taken by the fog. 1,000 souls, gone, just like that. Slaughtered as if they were nothing. A deep scowl appeared on Sonny's face. He leaned forward, piercing her with an intense gaze. What? How? If he was engaged in a battle with the forces of the Night Temple, how did the bastard simultaneously attack the settlement? She lingered for a while, then said with a hint of uncertainty, That monster, that Mordred, he was not how he had been in the future. He had grown weaker somehow, as if he did not possess 6 soul cores anymore, but instead, there were 5 strange creatures helping him, like the lesser versions of the one you had killed on the Reckoning Island. While we fought the prince himself, the 5 creatures attacked the town that we had left unprotected, slaughtering every human who lived there. Sonny leaned back, stunned. What? He shook his head. 5 of them. 5 reflections. Did he tear his soul apart to create them, granting each a single soul core? Suddenly, a frightening thought entered his mind. No, this can't be. Divine aspect holders, like himself and Mordred, followed a slightly different path than the rest of the Awakened. Unlike those with aspects of lesser rank, they could create 7 soul cores by absorbing fragments. Whether of souls or shadows didn't matter, but there was still a limit to the number of cores they could create. And to grow more powerful after that, they had to challenge nightmares like everyone else. So, Mordred's slaughter did not make any sense. He had already been a terror in the future, after all. Creatures, however, followed a path that was different entirely and almost reversed. By absorbing fragments, they did not create new soul cores. Instead, they rose in rank. Like Saint, for example, who had to consume shadow fragments from memories in order to ascend. If Mordred's reflections were the same as Saint, if they only needed a certain quantity of fragments to rank up, then there was no limit to how many fragments they could devour, and no end to their growth. Not until they reached the mythical divine rank. So, if the Prince of Nothing sacrificed 5 of his 6 soul cores to create 5 awakened beasts, then what was their rank now, after consuming thousands upon thousands of souls? Effie and Kai seemed like they had some questions, but they chose to remain silent, at least for now. Of course, they knew who Mordred was, and had a general impression of his powers. Sonny and Cassia had described their experience in the Night Temple to them in enough detail that their friends, as well as the Firekeepers, knew exactly what they would be facing should they cross paths with the Prince of Nothing. However, even Sonny himself had only a vague understanding of how Mordred's aspect functioned, and so did Cassia. so hearing how powerful he had grown in the nightmare was a shock to him. He shook his head as he tried to reckon with the implications.
The mere beast was a devil. Had it been created as such? Or had it earned more cores and battles with powerful nightmare creatures as Saint did? If it is the former, then does it mean that Mordred was more than a terror once? He had many reflections before Clan Valor imprisoned him too. Gods, just what kind of a menace was Anvil's firstborn here in the past?
And more importantly, just how dangerous was he going to become in the future? His somber thoughts were interrupted by Cassia, who spoke again after remaining silent for a while.
In any case, destroying Mordred's body was not too hard. He appeared wearing the body of the priestess who had first been sent to find him. But of course, simply destroying that body was useless, because he can just take another. In the chaos of battle, I didn't have time to explain what terrible powers the enemy possessed to the forces of the Night Temple. And more than that,
she shook her head somberly.
At the moment, I was not sure that it would have been the right thing to do. Was I meant to help the inhabitants of the nightmare slay one of the awakened from the waking world? Were we not supposed to be allies? No matter how vile Mordred was, and despite what had happened between us in the past, here in the nightmare, both he and I were meant to pursue the same goal.
The blind young woman sighed.
So, after a bloody battle, Mordred escaped our trap and disappeared. Soon after that, we learned of the massacre that had taken place while we were distracted by his deceit. And after witnessing the desolate town that his reflection had slaughtered, I was disabused of the notion that he and I were the same in any way. Sadly, by that time, it was already too late.
Cassia lowered her head, then continued quietly.
After feasting on the souls of the town's inhabitants, the reflections became much more powerful. Mordred was not bound by the necessity to stay hidden anymore as well. His attacks grew much more frequent and devastating, and the number of his victims started to grow with chilling speed. The more people he killed, the more dangerous he became. He was not invincible, of course. Among the awakened serving the Night Temple, there were a great number of people who possessed the means to contain him, especially the eyeless, who, like me, were immune to his possession. But Mordred knew that all too well, and so he went after those of us who could threaten him first.
She paused for a moment, her face growing solemn.
Eventually, the people outside, those who were still alive at least, grew so terrified that they left their homes and fled to the Night Temple, hoping that the High Priestess would protect them. The army and the priestesses grew desperate as well. We begged the one in the north to intervene. She was a transcendent and an oracle without any equal after all. And despite her indifference, my lady promised to face the creature herself. That day, people were so relieved that they held a grand celebration.
Cassia shook her head, remembering the bitter irony of those celebrations compared with what followed. She remained silent for a while, and then continued, her voice growing sad and wistful.
While everyone was celebrating, however, my lady summoned me in secret and asked me to deliver a message to her old friend, Lord Noctis in the East. Just the 3 words you heard. I am dead.
She paused for a moment and turned away, her beautiful face growing still.
I was appalled, of course. What about her immortality? What about all these people whom she promised to protect? She smiled sadly and told me that they were all dead as well, and that it was better that way.
A heavy sigh escaped from Cassia's lips. I left the next morning and made my way south all alone, traveling through the wilderness of the Kingdom of Hope, blind and without anyone's help. It was certainly not easy, but I managed to survive somehow, whether by luck or due to the one in the north protecting me. Mordred never intercepted my path. I had to face a few powerful nightmare creatures, though, as well as other dangers along the way. I overcame these obstacles and eventually reached the sanctuary, and on the day that I arrived, I finally felt it. The sudden change. A dark expression appeared on her face. My lady had died, and another flaw was added to Hope's prison. The approaching disaster was accelerated even more. You all, well, you know the rest. For a moment, Sunny could sense a hint of profound sorrow in Cassia's voice. But then, it disappeared, and the blind young woman smiled. So, now, I guess we're informed enough to make a decision about whether or not to support Noctis in his war against the rest of the Chain Lords. Sunny frowned, and then spoke in a grim tone. There is one thing we don't know, though. Something that can potentially change everything. Mordred. What is his goal? What is he going to do when the 4 Chain Lords go to war? Cassia hesitated and slowly lifted her head up to face him. That I don't know. He must have realized the nature of the Nightmare's conflict himself by now. Or maybe he had always known it. Through means that none of us can even guess about. He was the one who had sought out this seed, put the idea of seeking out the knives into our heads, and manipulated us into bringing him here after all. No matter what his goal is, though, I doubt that he just wants to become a master. He is here for something else as well. Sunny remained silent for a bit, then let out a frustrated growl and turned away. All right then. I guess it's time to choose our fate. All 4 friends sat quietly, waiting for one of the others to speak. They all knew the gravity of this decision. It could either mean their triumph or their utter destruction. No one spoke for a while. The weight of the decision before them was too heavy. It was a solemn silence between the 4 allies. Finally, it was Effie who broke the undecided quiet. Puffing out the tiny chest of the body she currently resided in, she tried her best to look as courageous and resolute as one could while trapped inside the form of a child.
I mean, it's not much of a choice, is it? Sure, going against 3 immortal saints doesn't exactly seem like a picnic, but we already know that they were eventually defeated in the end, right? We've seen it in the future, so it's not impossible to do, and we don't even know what the alternative is. How do we ensure that Hope doesn't escape her prison? Kill Noctis? That would only delay the inevitable, since this whole damn place is already on the verge of collapse due to her influence. That Hope, she is scary?
She hesitated for a moment, then asked with a bit of confusion.
To be honest, I am not even sure what she is. What kind of a demon is powerful enough to drive a whole region mad? Is she unholy?
Sunny sighed, then massaged his temples.
No. If anything, she's divine. She is also not a demon. She is a daemon. Daemons were lesser deities of sorts, who were said to have created themselves. They appeared out of nowhere, possessing powers that were similar to those of the gods, but different. The spell has a weird tendency to never mention the word daemon, though, for some reason. In any case, It seems that the gods and the daemons eventually had a big, terrible war, and Hope's imprisonment and escape were a prelude to that war, I think.
Effie listened to him without any particular expression showing on her face. Then she shrugged.
Oh, well, in that case, that just proves my point. Trying to keep a thing like her in chains. Doesn't killing 3 immortal saints suddenly seem easy by comparison?
Kai moved slightly, and then his hoarse voice suddenly resounded in the stone room.
I think we're looking at it wrong. The question is not what should we do. It is what should be done, don't you think? Yes, there is no particular way in which a nightmare has to be resolved, but that doesn't mean that some resolutions can't be right, and some can't be wrong. This land has been turned into hell by Hope, who is trying to escape her chains. Until she is released, that will not change.
He leaned forward, frowned, and added somberly,
The Red Colosseum, the Ivory City, and all across the ruins of her kingdom, madness reigns, turning humans into wicked perversions of themselves. Sure, we can win by prolonging it, but should we? Would we be at peace with such a conclusion? You can call me naive, but I think that, although the spell does not dictate what the challengers do in the nightmare, it still matters why we do it. We are still responsible for our actions and their consequences. So, I think that we need to do what is right.
Sunny glanced at him, and then asked, his voice harsh,
Who's to say what is right? How do you know that by releasing Hope we won't be dooming everyone living here to an instant death? 1,000 years in chains? Personally, I would have been a bit angry.
Kai lingered for a moment, then shook his head.
You are right. I might not know what is right, but I do know what is wrong. And what I saw here was deeply, deeply wrong.
Sunny considered this.
Well, it's not like I disagree. In fact, I hate this place with a passion. I don't really care if Hope simply kills everyone either. As far as I'm concerned, the bastards deserve it.
He waited for a few moments, then turned to Cassia.
What about you? You've been terribly quiet.
The blind young woman hesitated for a while, then spoke evenly. I am willing to do whatever you decide. I'll trust in your judgment, Sunny. He frowned, studying her face with a dark expression.
Why? You don't have an opinion?
Cassia remained silent for a bit, then simply shook her head.
Damnation.
He knew, of course, why the seer was reluctant to speak. She must have seen something, a glimpse of the future that she did not want to share, knowing that it would affect their thinking, possibly informing the very events she wanted to happen, or wished to avoid. Her own opinion was already compromised by that knowledge, and so Cassia had decided to remove herself from the decision-making completely. It seemed as though she had grown wary of her visions and the consequences of acting on them after the Forgotten Shore.
Damned oracles.
Sunny sighed, then glanced at Effie and Kai.
Well, then there is not much to discuss. The two of you are keen to join Noctis, and I guess I am too. He might be a madman, but at least he's the madman we know. And, I also sort of like the guy. I mean, sure, he is a dishonest, lying, conniving, crazy, dastardly cheat, but no one is perfect, you know?
Effie giggled.
Well, it's almost as if he's reminding me of someone. Huh. Now, who might that be?
Then she grinned at Sunny and asked,
That's settled then? So, should we go and deliver the good news to that dastardly cheat? You know, about how he doesn't need to kill us and put our souls into home appliances?
She seemed like she was ready to go, but Sunny stopped her with a hesitant gesture. This next part, he had thought about it a lot, not knowing if it was the right thing to do or a giant mistake. He was still not sure, but had a feeling that the decision he had made in the end was the correct one. At least, it felt that way. In any case, there was no going back. Sunny remained silent for a bit, and then glanced at his friends with a tense expression.
Before we do, there's something I need to tell you.
Effie and Kai stared at him with slight surprise written on their faces, while Cassia's eyebrows suddenly flew up. She already knew what was about to happen, of course. Kai looked at him and smiled.
Oh? What is it?
Sunny sighed, turned away, then faced them and shrugged.
Nah, it's nothing too serious, just, well, to tell you the truth.
He gripped the emerald amulet tighter and said,
My flaw is that I can't lie. I have a true name, which I received in my first nightmare. My aspect is of the divine rank. I have 3 soul cores. Actually shadow cores, which technically makes me a demon. Hence, this ugly body. I have already unlocked my aspect's legacy. I inherited the lineage of one of the 7 daemons. Oh, and also, how do I say this? I might be Lord Mongrel. Sorry about that one, Kai.
Sunny looked at Kai and Effie. Their jaws had nearly hit the floor. Effie, who was already standing up to leave, froze, then slowly sat back down. Kai dropped his wooden mask to the floor and stared at him with wide eyes. Even Cassia seemed a bit stunned, despite knowing most of the things he had just said already. A deathly silence settled in the room, and Sunny found himself being pierced by 2 dumbfounded gazes. He scratched his neck, then coughed awkwardly and looked away.
Yeah, that's more or less all that I wanted to say.
Of course, the decision to reveal these secrets to his friends had not been an easy one to make. In fact, it went against everything that Sunny believed in. Every instinct in his body screamed that he was making a terrible mistake. But instinct was not always the best advisor. Otherwise, what was the point of having intelligence and the ability to think about your decisions? The fact of the matter was that Sunny had already done irreparable damage to his relationships once because of his untrusting nature. Back on the Forgotten Shore, he had kept his secrets a little bit too well, failing to understand how his deceptiveness would make others perceive him. Sure, he had a reason to behave the way he had, and yes, he had never really lied to his allies, simply withholding or manipulating the information a little to keep himself safe. But the others did not know about his reasons. All they knew was that their trust was never returned fully, and that he was full of secrets, discrepancies, and insidiously subtle ways to keep those secrets to himself. Sunny had never explained himself, and in the absence of an explanation, the misunderstanding was bound to inevitably take its place, perhaps to dire results. Who knew? If he had been more open with Nephis, she might not have considered him a liar, absorbing that false perception into her own forming self. Would things have ended differently then? Would she be sitting at this table with them at this very moment? Regardless, currently Sonny knew both the aspects and, more importantly, the flaws of every member of the cohort. But they couldn't say the same. They revealed their weaknesses to him, but he held on to his own, failing to reciprocate this trust. For now, everything seemed fine, but that one-sided nature of their friendship was bound to fester in the future, and the small crack it created would grow in size, eventually destroying it. Plus, at this point, even Mordred knew his secrets. It would have been silly if the Prince of Nothing did, but Effie and Kai did not. Silly, and also dangerous. So, Sonny decided to take a leap of faith and put his trust in his friends. It had been a long time coming anyway. But, damnation, why did being honest with people feel so disgusting? What a loathsome sensation. Ugh, curses, I'm all itchy. After a full minute of stunned silence, Effie finally spoke, her voice sounding uncharacteristically tame.
Now, hold on. Wait a minute.
She raised her small hand and showed one finger.
Your flaw. We sort of already had a general idea after spending so much time with you. It is still... Wait. You can't lie at all? What?
Sonny shrugged. I can't say a lie aloud, and I am compelled to answer any question asked of me truthfully, or at least to the best of my ability. He expected some sort of spicy questions to follow immediately, some kind of magically influenced game of truth or dare. But to his surprise, Effie remained silent, showing just how bewildered she was. Even her usual mischievousness disappeared. Instead, the little girl simply raised a second finger.
All right. The true name. We sort of figured that out too. You seemed reluctant to share it for some reason, so Kai and I did not press.
Sonny let out a heavy sigh, hesitated for a moment, then forced himself to speak. That has to do with an innate ability of my aspect. If certain conditions are met, it can make me vulnerable to those who know my true name. That is why I kept it a secret, and also put a lot of effort into appearing as weak and pathetic as possible, so that no one would even suspect that a weakling like me could possess a true name. His face grew a bit dim. Being considered a weakling is generally great because it makes enemies underestimate you. I'm more than fine with people thinking little of me. But, after I started pretending, things got out of hand really fast. Effie blinked a couple of times, remained silent for a moment, then raised a third finger.
Well, I guess that explains a few things. Now, about Lord Mongrel. We knew, of course. I mean, it was sort of obvious.
At that point, both Kai and Cassia turned to her and spoke simultaneously. Kai seemed even more surprised than before.
What? I didn't know.
Cassia, meanwhile, seemed a bit confused. She asked hesitantly,
I am sorry, but who is Lord Mongrel?
Effie stared at them with a funny expression.
What do you mean you did not know? You were the one who helped him buy that armor.
Kai opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again.
Wait, what armor? I helped. The stone armor from the memory market? That dusty, ugly thing? No, it's not the same. The material is completely different. The fit, the design. Mongrel's armor is very chic. Not at all like that cumbersome stone clunker.
Sonny covered his face, then said somberly,
The stone changes to a stone-like metal due to an enchantment. It was just broken and required an awakened to activate the restoration process. As for the fit, you do remember that memories adjust themselves to accommodate the owner's body, right? Hell, now that I have a tail, even it is armored when I summon the mantle.
The young man stared at him with a lost expression, then leaned back in his chair.
Oh, I see then. But, I mean, no, never mind.
Sonny massaged his temples.
I never meant for Mongrel to get famous. I just wanted to practice swordsmanship in the dreamscape, and all good aliases were already taken. Who knew that a damned broadcaster would spread that clip of me fighting everywhere on the network? Oh, gods. Things only got worse after that.
Effie looked at him, then at her 3 fingers, then made a little fist.
But the rest? A divine aspect? What? Do those even exist? 3 soul cores? A demon's lineage? What even is that? And what is next? Are you going to tell us that you have a divine memory or something?
The little girl let out a nervous giggle and mockingly shook her head. Sonny stared at her for a bit, then cautiously cleared his throat.
Well, actually, I have 2.
Sometime later, Sonny left the room, walked between the tall menhirs, and entered the sprawling garden of the sanctuary. The cohort had intended to talk to Noctis together, but after his bombshell of a revelation, the others needed some time to digest all the new information and decided to stay behind.
Understandable.
In truth, Sonny also wanted to be left alone for a few minutes, although he felt that he had made the right decision. Revealing his secrets had been an uncomfortable experience. He felt as if an invisible weight had been lifted off his shoulders a bit, but he was also rattled and uneasy. He felt naked. Sonny could use a little solitude to gather his thoughts, too. After the initial shock, he went into more detail about his capabilities, explaining how a divine aspect worked and the circumstances of how he earned it. However, it wasn't like he knew much about the matter, so the conversation was not too long. It had helped the others better understand his powers, as well as that of Nephis, and, most importantly, of Mordred. Now, they were as ready to face the Prince of Nothing as they could be, should a conflict with him happen. Additionally, due to everyone gaining deeper insight into Sonny's powers, their already profound synergy as a battle unit was bound to grow even more refined. Sonny kept a few things to himself as well. However, while he still wasn't being entirely transparent, at least now he was openly acknowledging it. Effie and Kai understood that there were things he wasn't ready to share, and why he was reluctant to do so. They seemed to respect his wishes. All in all, it went surprisingly well. Walking through the beautiful garden, which was illuminated by the pale light of the full moon, Sonny enjoyed the tranquil air of the sanctuary. At some point, however, a slightly disconcerting thought entered his mind.
I wonder, was this decision of mine influenced by some degree by Hope's poison? If so, what deep desire of mine had she amplified to push me toward being honest with my friends for a change?
Suddenly thoughtful, Sonny approached the door of the sorcerer's lair, waited patiently for the sailor dolls to open it, and walked inside.
Maybe I was always...
His eyes suddenly narrowed, and his hand shot to the side, ready to grasp the shaft of the cruel sight. Something was very wrong inside the dark hall. A thick, nauseating smell of blood invaded his nostrils, sending adrenaline coursing through his own. It surrounded him like a suffocating wave, as though a terrible massacre had just taken place in the immortal sorcerer's quarters. But Sonny did not see any corpses. The central chamber was just as he had left it the last time, empty of all furniture, with a vast circle of runes drawn on the stone floor. No, not entirely the same. The floor had cracked in several places, as though something was pushing at it from beneath, exerting devastating pressure on the ancient stones. Noctis was still in the center of the circle. One of his sleeves was rolled up, and there was a deep cut on his left wrist, a stream of blood running down his hand and falling down like a crimson ribbon. In his other hand, he held the diamond sickle. The sorcerer was surrounded by a shallow pool of blood. However, it somehow failed to touch the hems of his garments. Sonny stared at him for a few moments, noticing that the stone surface seemed to be slowly absorbing the blood. Then, he gripped the emerald amulet and asked evenly,
Are you trying to kill yourself?
Noctis slowly opened his eyes, glanced at Sonny, and then smiled brightly. Then, acting as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening, he wiped the diamond sickle, hid it in the folds of his silk garment, and stood up.
What? Of course not. I'm too young to die.
Sonny gave him a dubious look.
Young? You are at least 1,000 years old.
The sorcerer tilted his head, scratched his cheek with a thoughtful look, and then smiled even brighter.
What? Of course not. I'm too beautiful to die.
Happy with himself, Noctis somehow made the cut on his wrist close, jumped over the pool of blood, and walked towards Sonny with a relaxed expression.
Come, this place needs to be aired, I think. The garden is nice and chill, though.
Sonny threw one last look at the disappearing pool of blood. Did he imagine it? Or had the stone floor of the chamber trembled slightly just then? Shaking his head, he turned away and followed Noctis outside. Together, they slowly headed for the altar island. Noctis seemed to enjoy the silence of the moonlit garden a lot. A minute or two later, though, he broke it with a carefree question.
So, what did you want to tell me? Have you and your friends come to a decision?
Sonny hesitated for a moment, then answered,
We did. We will help you free Hope.
Noctis grinned.
Oh, wonderful.
After that, he didn't say anything else. Sonny waited for a while, a little confused. They had already reached the white altar and sat down on a stone bench, enjoying the sight of the pristine lake, with a pale circle of the moon reflecting on its calm surface. And yet, the sorcerer seemed to lose his ability to speak. Slightly irritated, Sonny hesitated for a moment, and then asked awkwardly,
So, do you need me to give you the knives?
Noctis looked at him with an easy smile and shrugged.
No need. Keep them.
Sonny's eye twitched.
What do you mean, keep them? Weren't the knives what you were after?
The immortal sorcerer looked at the reflection of the moon, then waved a hand vaguely.
We can deal with them when the time comes. Things will sort themselves out, one way or another.
He remained silent for a bit, and then added, his smile slowly disappearing.
Now that the one in the north is dead, things will start moving faster. The other chain lords are probably already in motion.
Noctis sighed, then leaned back and looked up at the sky.
We won't have as much time to prepare as I would have hoped. 2 months, perhaps. Maybe even less.
You and your friends should spend that time wisely. Once the end starts, we won't have an opportunity to relax like this until it's all over. Sonny grew silent, then looked at the tranquil lake. After a few moments, he said,
We will help you, but I have some questions.
Amused by that statement, Noctis laughed. You even have questions on a night like this? Sunless, you should learn how to enjoy yourself from time to time. Take a moment and appreciate the world. Otherwise, what is the point in living? Sonny glanced at him with a deadpan expression.
Do I look like someone who knows what the point of living is? Thanks for the advice. I'll take your words to heart. However, I still have questions.
The sorcerer made a dour face and sighed. All right, one question. I'll answer one question. So think well before asking it. Sonny did not speak for a while, staring at the reflection of the moon. His face grew serious, deep shadows veiling his eyes. After several minutes spent in silence, he finally frowned, looked at Noctis, and said,
All right, I have my question, and you better answer it. Honestly, why did Sun God destroy Hope's kingdom?
The immortal raised his eyebrows, then threw his head back and laughed. By the moon, of all the questions in the world, you just had to ask this one, didn't you? He shook his head and then looked away. Well, a deal is a deal. I'll answer. Like many others who tried to answer this question over the centuries. Some said that it was because she was a daemon. Others said that it was because she was too powerful, that she had grown too prideful, or that she had grown too radiant, outshining even the Lord of Light. But they were all wrong. In truth, at least, what I think is the truth, Hope wasn't punished because she was too powerful, too prideful, or too radiant. He remained silent for a few moments, and then sighed. It was because she was worshipped.